about 1 o'clock. Is it 1 o'clock? Yeah, it's 1:01. So I'd like to call to order the Kentucky Community and Technical College System Board of Regents special meeting to order. The press was notified of this meeting on May 24th, 2024. I would like to ask Ms. Duncan, parliamentarian and general counsel, to please call the roll.
Chair Martin.
Here.
Vice Chair Hamilton. Secretary Witten. Regent Cox. Regent Finan.
Here.
Regent Girdler. Regent Green.
Here.
Regent Herdink.
Here.
Regent Hodges. Regent Sutherland.
Here.
Regent Alexandra Martin.
Here.
Regent McGraw.
Here.
Regent Rabinowitz. Regent Stevens.
Here.
All right, we have a quorum. We may proceed.
Okay, thanks. Before we talk about the minutes, I'd like to introduce Marty Sutherland. He and I played phone tag this morning, so I've not had a chance to really welcome him to the board, so I'll do that now. Welcome to the board, Marty.
Thank you, sir.
So Marty is taking the spot that Patsy had to relinquish due to her interim presidency. So thank you for doing so, Marty, and Patsy, thank you for your service on the board as well.
Thank you, Chair Martin.
So the minutes have been distributed to all the members. Are there any corrections, modifications to the meeting minutes for March 14th, 2024? If not, do I hear a motion to accept them submitted?
So moved.
Okay.
Second.
Second by Joe. Motion was made by Karen, second by Joe. Parliamentarian Duncan.
And we may approve these by consensus. So all in favor, please raise your hand or say aye.
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 The minutes are passed.
Okay, thank you. So thank you for joining us today. As y'all are aware, the state legislature has passed Senate Joint Resolution 179, which requires us to take a hard look at 11 prescribed areas and come back to them by December 2024 with a recommendation. So today we're not going to take any action on what we discuss. Today is more for just education, information, and a time to discuss things with some of our efforts. So the Board of Regents and the PLT and some of the cabinet are here with us, and we're just looking at some of the areas that are to be considered. So Dr. Quarles, I'll let you take it from here, and you can introduce an overview and our guest.
Yep. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and welcome aboard Regent Marty Sutherland. You were just sworn in this morning, so glad to have you on board, and congratulations. Generally, we try to avoid specially called Board of Regents meetings. However, given the magnitude and scope of the Senate Joint Resolution that the General Assembly has really tasked us with, we felt that today's for information only meeting is one where we can help bring the board up to speed with some ideas that are not old, but ideas that we have been working aggressively on since sine die on April 15th. This is an opportunity for us. It's an opportunity for us to grow, and an opportunity to prepare ourselves for the next 25 years as a community college system. And more importantly, it gives us a chance to chart our own path forward instead of having it decided for us. So this is a chance for us to have an inclusive, a robust action plan. This is not a study, but an action plan to right size our system for the next 25 years. So specifically, the joint resolution asks us to take a look at 11 specific areas. And hopefully you've got a copy of that in front of you. Those 11 areas, I'll just tick through them very quickly, are accreditation status. Should we stay where we're at or go to single accreditation? The possibility of mergers and consolidations, governance reform, including the Board of Regents, but also our advisory boards that populate our colleges around Kentucky, affordability, tuition, our tuition model, our funding model as well, which again was referenced in the state audit report last year. They also want us to take a look at our personnel system and any outdated statutory language or outdated regulations that are not serving a purpose anymore. They also want to let us look at academic programming, including a complete process, which has already started with work out of Huron about academic program review across the system, as well as the relevancy of our credentials, making sure that our credentials are meeting the workforce needs and that they have value associated with them. And then finally, the last bucket of the 11 items has to do with student pathways, and that includes the future of dual credit and our association with that, with 1/3 of our enrollees being dual credit students. Our transfer issues, and this isn't just about classes that may not be transferring to four-year institutions, but also how we can improve the number of our students going on to a four-year baccalaureate pathway as well. And then finally, we're focusing on workforce. The General Assembly wants us to come up with our own specific workforce development plan. So 11 items. Fortunately, we have put those 11 items into 5 work groups, one of which you're going to hear from later today from Dr. Scott Williams. These work groups are a collection of our faculty, staff, and presidents, as well as personnel from the system office from around the state. This allows us to have balanced viewpoints and perspectives as we share ideas throughout this process. The college presidents will be serving as subgroup team leads, but it's also important to know that our peer teams are being engaged as well along the way. All KCTCS employees are invited to give feedback, and in fact, tomorrow, the project management office will be launching our SharePoint site so that information gathered throughout this work stream can be shared across the KCTCS family. And we do encourage that anybody employed through the KCTCS apparatus has the opportunity to share ideas along the way. Now, today, you're going to have the opportunity to hear from 4 speakers. I know we have an aggressive agenda ahead of us, so I'll get right to it. These 4 speakers are leaders in American higher education who have their own perspective and journeys when it comes to mergers and consolidations, when it comes to changes in accreditation as well. Just this morning, we met with Dr. Belle Whelan with SACS COC to let her know that we've started a process of just looking into possible changes at KCTCS. But we felt that it's important that the Board of Regents just take a moment this afternoon to listen to these 4 speakers, all of whom have presented before PLT or our work groups already, so that we have an opportunity for you as Regents to hear the same information and ask questions as well. I'd like to remind folks that this is an open meeting. It is being recorded, so anybody can go back and watch these presentations at their own leisure. No votes will be taken today. No action will be taken, and no decisions will be made today. It's for information education only. For our speakers, either I or Chairman Martin can introduce you. We do ask you to keep your presentations to 20 minutes so we can have around 10 minutes of discussion dedicated to the Regents after each one. After we hear from the 4, we're going to hear from Dr. Scott Williams, who's headed up the work of the governance and organizational structure subgroup. And you may be asking, why are we only hearing from one of the 5 subgroups today? Well, the outcomes of this one really will guide the direction of the decisions of the other 4. So we really need to decide what, if any, changes will be made with governance structure, possible changes with accreditation and mergers and consolidations first, because that will affect the workflow of the other four work groups. So with that said, Mr. Chairman, I'll send it back to you. If you'd like, I can go ahead and introduce our first speaker.
Yeah, if you don't mind, just go ahead and introduce our first speaker.
Yes, and if there's no questions for me, we're first going to hear from Dr. Paul Frigga, who many of us met in Boston earlier this year at AGB conference, and he brings 35 years of experience, not just as a professor or researcher, but also 10 years of helping institutions and colleges and universities navigate current issues that are going on across the United States. And so we've asked him to give somewhat of a macro view of trends and issues that are inevitable, that are affecting other institutions, and how specifically that affects KCTCS. So Dr. Frigga, if you're ready, the floor is yours. Again, would like to remind you to try to keep your comments to about 20 minutes or so. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everyone. Nice to see you and connect with you. I assume I can be heard okay?
Yes, sir.
Great. Well, it is a pleasure. I even had the opportunity to come visit your presidents in person last week. It seemed like longer ago, and then meet with them virtually. So this is the third connection. And each time I get more and more energized about the exciting opportunities you have at this wonderful system for transformation and for helping the state of Kentucky. Very, very bright future, very big decisions, and tremendous opportunities. So it's an honor to be part of this. I will, looks like someone's sharing my slides, so I won't have to share them, and I'll just speak to move through them as we go. By way of background, the next slide is a whole bunch of text. Oh, you're using the PDF. That's fine. One of the most important things I want to tell you is that my father was a president of a community college in Virginia. So I am very familiar with the role of community colleges and technical colleges and the value they play in society. I have dedicated my professional career to helping higher education of any type of institution. And I work with AGB for both research projects, presentations, as was alluded to earlier, and webinars, as well as applied projects to support any kinds of transformation. So this is right up my alley. I think doing these kind of strategic transformations is necessary. I'm going to show you a few slides that really set the stage that this next decade of higher education is going to be the most transformative since its founding. I also work as a professor at University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill in the business school, and teaching strategy and consulting. So my agenda, I have 3 topics that I'll present slides on and then allow 10 minutes for Q&A. So I will go through the slides pretty quickly, but we'll be leaving them behind if you want to dig into them any deeper, or you can revisit some of them in the Q&A portion. 3 topics. One is the macro higher education environment. Again, why it's being shaped up for transformation and needs transformation. Number 2 is community colleges across the country, specifically some of the efforts toward accreditation, toward consolidation, and what they've been doing and why. And then finally, talk a bit about Kentucky and the KCTCS. Let's start with the macro environment. I'm pretty sure you have read articles about the changing nature and probably experienced firsthand of what employers are asking for. I will also give a shout out to community colleges and Kentucky in particular for being closely aligned with employers and typically being ahead of what the workforce needs are in terms of training. Higher education is becoming more vested in this and very interested in the work you're doing, and I'll talk about that in a minute. But the changing student needs and expectations, a few of them to highlight. One is there's a macro need for more adults to get higher education. We have a tremendous number of partial credit individuals who have taken some community college or some 4-year degree work and not finished their education. The workforce is also requiring new skills, and expectations of students are for more flexible delivery, hybrid options, different times in their career, things like that. The perception of value of college, I have a couple slides on this coming up, but students are particularly questioning the value of a four-year degree, which works in the favor of community colleges. But there are also wondering about return on investment in total versus just going right into the workforce. And a number of employers are decreasing the need for degrees for required jobs and doing a bit more of the training on their own. So the question of return on investment and continuously taxing and reinvesting, some states are looking into that and asking for more specific returns to the objectives of the state in terms of economic development and advancement. Technology and digital transformation is taking place because new technologies enable operations to be more systematic and coordinated, and decreasing the need for some human interactions to the benefit of students. And for examples, technology support, student advising, things that used to require a lot of in-person work is being done much more digitally. And then the credentials, I have a slide on this coming up, but more effort toward workforce credentials, toward certificates, in addition to degrees. This is where I start getting negative. And I do not want to be negative. Those of you who have met me and heard me present, I am a very optimistic, positive person. But there are some serious headwinds coming toward higher education. That is the impetus for your study. I think it's rightly charged by the legislators to have this review. And I would recommend serious action, nothing incremental. Why would I say that? Well, our starting point is we have an oversupply of higher education. So we have built up higher education, not just Kentucky, but other states as well. You might know we have many community colleges in the state of North Carolina, but not just community colleges, but higher education. So it's been a build for the past several decades. It's been a build with no end in sight in terms of enrollments, growth, and even tuition increases. However, this has resulted, as you can see on the slide, of unused capacity. So we have excess capacity. We have too much of a good thing, both on the four-year bucket, but also in community college bucket. The chart on the left talks about 4 years. The white area above the blue represents the excess capacity. So the used capacity would be students who are taking classes, filling the seats that are available. But as we've increased over time, in terms of more schools, more opportunities, more courses, the demand has grown, but not at the same rate. So for the four-year institutions, the excess capacity has grown from 8% to 17%, and that's only through 2019. Estimates are it's 20 to 25% now. So think of that as an industry. Many of you are from industry. You have just too much supply for the given demand. The chart on the right describes the two-year public institutions, and you can see that gap has grown even bigger. So there has been somewhat of a contraction. This is, of course, nationwide. In terms of the demand, you can see the blue represents the demand. That's the used capacity of people taking the classes. But there's been a decline. And again, that's only through 2019. 2020, 21 were really tough years for community colleges. And then 22 and 23, we've seen an uptick, quite frankly, recovering from the downturn of over 14% nationwide of decrease in enrollments in two-year institutions. Let's go on. So our starting point is we have too many higher education seats. I would have not done an analysis of Kentucky, but I would assume it's going to be a similar situation. So the actual supply of seats right now, and you probably have excess capacity in your built infrastructure at certain institutions. The other thing to make things worse, as we look forward, we have fewer high school graduates. You may have heard of this as the demographic cliff. So about 18, 19 years ago, we had, with the Great Recession, we had fewer birth rates, lower numbers of births. So this is just an indisputable fact that the number of high school graduates will be declining over the next 8 years. And that is going to be really tough because the competition for students to come to particular institutions is going to get greater. It's not going to affect the top 100 institutions. They can just drop their admissions a bit and have total demand. It's the smaller schools that are going to feel the brunt of this. The competition will increase for a smaller base of students coming out of high school. So that is going to continue to cause negative consequences for across the country, varying levels of effect. I'll show you some more specific information about Kentucky. You do live in a favorable state in terms of population and interest in migration. You don't want to be in the Midwest or Northeast. They're the ones feeling the most serious brunt. But nonetheless, this is going to have negative impacts on enrollments. So everything you think of in terms of enrollments, you should be planning in your mind, what do we do if enrollments go down? And that's an important assumption for a board with your fiduciary responsibility to be knowing that our financial conditions could be getting worse and will be getting worse because you are so dependent upon tuition as part of your proposition. Next slide. This is probably hard for you to see, but I'll just summarize it. And I got a little red arrow going in there that because there's so much of a variance, the number of all 18-year-olds is going down. The color coding, if it's orange, brighter orange is worse. You're a light orange. That's the Kentucky line. So you're not as bad as some of the declines. The blue represents growth. So the number of students attending a top ranked school in the bottom right-hand corner, they're not going to have any problem. And then the ones going to 4-year, you'll see some issues there. You are the 2-year bucket. So the second one from the left on the top, and that's a darker color. So you will be seeing a decline in the state of Kentucky. And I think you have some projections built out on this and probably have incorporated some of these data that will have great effects for community colleges. Again, a negative story about just demographics decreasing. Go ahead. What's going to happen as a result of that? A number of your institutions, in fact, the majority of them already have negative operating margins. The basic revenues do not exceed the basic expenses. And so you have to subsidize that through additional sources of revenue and past fund benefits or balances. But that's not a long-term sustainable solution. So when you think about fiscal management of these individual schools within the system of Kentucky, you really should look at the financials of them individually and then collectively. But as a country, expenses are exceeding revenues. That's what this 103% is. 30 to 40% of 4-year higher education institutions have negative operating margins, and more of them of community colleges have negative operating margins. And again, that becomes unsustainable. You should be always having in your mind as the leaders, what do we do to stabilize the financial position of our institutions? What kind of change do we need to make? Because now we know demand is going to be going down and we're already currently at a negative operating margin. It becomes difficult to manage for the long term. It will come through both income statements and balance sheets. I won't go through each of these. Let's see. Okay. Yeah. So the majority of institutions are in what Bain and Company calls a weak or moderate condition. Only a few are strong. That's the red at the bottom. Most community colleges are either weak or moderate when you consider primary reserve ratio, net margin, and enrollment growth. And so I would imagine the majority of yours are in that either weak or moderate category. You've got an interesting mix of larger and smaller across the state and geographically spread. But as a country, the majority of institutions are in a tough situation. So this isn't Kentucky specific. This is macro. You'll see that little uptick in 21. You'll also notice in your results, 21, 22, sometimes 23 have had the artificial stimulus money of the federal government making amends for COVID. Half of that $77 billion going to students and half going to higher ed institutions. So you'll see an uptick, but don't be misled by that. Even if there was a decent year in 21 or 22 and 23, that money is gone now. And so only some who didn't spend it in 22 have it in 23. No one's really having it in 24, 25. So we're going to see a continued erosion of the financials for all of higher ed. One of the hardest things to reconcile is how would you design this system from scratch? If you were saying, all right, we don't have any infrastructure, would you indeed put as many individual units throughout a state, for example? The problem is when you do that, and if you do it autonomously, you have to build up all of the administrative and academic infrastructure. You have to have IT people, HR, marketing, admissions, and you have to have all of those folks who do all of the work at one location, and then have faculty there as well. So that structure is redundant. You probably wouldn't design it from scratch by that. You would probably do what most people are starting to move toward and think more of consolidated with branch locations, but not all the heavy investment that you have to have for full autonomy. It's very hard for individual colleges in a community college system, but even nationwide for small liberal arts colleges who are right across the street from each other to try to survive, again, with a redundant an investment of infrastructure. And if those of you have business background, you would question the same sort of design. You would be like, do we really need all of that everywhere? That's the question here. This slide shows how hard it is as a small institution to make ends meet and to keep up with changes when you have to make those investments. And with a smaller number of students coming to your institution, you cannot get enough revenue to cover those basic expenses. Next slide. So what's going to happen as a result of this? There's going to be more mergers and more closures. The closure rate has increased in higher education to a pace of 1 a week. You will see more and more, especially small privates and small publics. And then for community college, you're going to see more and more mergers, trying to eliminate the redundancy that's in the system, approximately 20% too much capacity. And so that's a cost to society and to taxpayers. So the theory of consolidation and elimination of redundancy and closure at the same time are going to increase in the future. This is another slide that just highlights the fact that the majority of these changes are going to be for small institutions. Between under 1,000 is where 80% of the closures and consolidations are going to take place. Any institutions under 1,000, and then under 2,000 is the next largest group. That's the blue and the orange on the left-hand side. The vast majority of closures, consolidations is going to be smaller institutions. And it changes by region. Again, the South is better than the Midwest or the North. One other phenomenon on a macro basis is that more and more organizations are dropping the requirement for a 4-year degree. And that's a positive in some people's eyes. It's an opportunity for community colleges to fill that gap, especially if you can complement it with competency-based programs that you might be moving into, which are skill-based and competency-based. But it is going to really change the nature of the workforce. This is a slide from an article I wrote about, well, what do you do about all this? We're going to have declining enrollments for another decade. Well, one is you need to clarify the purpose and the differentiation of what you offer, and think about uniqueness, and also eliminating redundancy. The second one is to change your products, more certificates, more standardized offerings to a broader audience, more hybrid and online, more partnerships, joint research, mergers with other institutions. 4-year, in some states like Wisconsin, 4-year institutions are becoming completely aligned with the 2-year. And a lot of the 4 years are really trying to pull all the transfers to their institutions. Also, nationwide, some 4-year programs are starting to offer associate degrees. And probably, I don't know this for a fact, but probably in Kentucky or coming to Kentucky soon, because many other states, the 4-year institutions are getting into your space. By the same time, 2-year institutions can start offering 4-year degrees. And even Those 4 years are thinking about giving a certificate or a 2-year degree for all of their students who come through 2 years and complete the liberal arts and then go on for 2 years. So you're going to see a real disruption in a competition in terms of the products and partnerships. What I would recommend is always keeping in mind the last P, the profitability, because all decision making should have some consideration of the financial impact and the long-term viability of the system. Obviously, student outcomes are number one, but very quick is fiscal impacts, and then third would be impacts on the community and engagement with community. And so we discussed those 3 criteria with the president's group when they were looking into strategic options: students, fiscal, and community. This slide just says some people were predicting this a while ago in terms of closures and mergers. It's taken a little longer because there are exit barriers, especially in public institutions, because you serve as employers in a region. You don't want to shut it down completely. But pure economics suggests that these mergers and closures are on their way. Here, there really haven't been a ton of mergers. There was an average of 3 a year. Now it's moved up to 5 or 6 a year through 2020. That rate is going to go up significantly over the next 5 years. And the type of transactions, again, to reiterate, are going to be primarily smaller institutions, private institutions, but you will see this. Go ahead. This last section just kind of shows you, one of the biggest public consolidation efforts are going to be more of these examples. This is in Pennsylvania. I happened to live in Pittsburgh for 6 years, actually 8 years, when I was working at PwC and McKinsey. So I knew their system pretty well. I even went to St. Francis University, a small Catholic school there. But they have a bunch of, again, redundant institutions that really didn't look that much different than each other. They were just kind of providing similar things, maybe a little different. They were competing for students. They all kind of wanted to be mini Penn States. And so finally, the legislature said, enough's enough. Let's fix this. So they said, we want you to fix the sustainability, make it better for students, and increase the efficiency and effectiveness of the system. Those were the 3 criteria they used. They're expecting to save $120 million over the next 5 years. I know the people involved with it. I had them on webinars. It's going pretty well. The next slide just basically shows you what happened. They took 6 institutions in Pennsylvania and collapsed them to 2. They took a lead institution in a region and then brought in the ones that were surrounding it. And they said, you are becoming a new institution. And you're going to be shared services. You're going to do hybrid. You're going to offer the same stuff. And so you're going to basically have 2 larger institutions instead of 6. And so these slides just kind of describe the details. They created Penn West University with 3 institutions, and then they created the Commonwealth University of Pennsylvania with 3 other institutions, regionally based with 1 lead. It's an interesting model for consideration of your dynamics, where you have some larger campuses that maybe could be consolidated with smaller campuses for a more efficient system. And that could happen even within single accreditation of the entire system. All right, so let's move now to community colleges and talk a little bit about what's going on there. I will be saving time for Q&A. This is a pretty busy slide. I just want to say, I want to highlight the associate degree is on a rise. If you look over on the left, the purple, doing better in fall 2023 than it is in fall 2022. Again, that's a recovery from a big drop in 22 and 21. So associate degrees are up, even undergraduates are up. Graduate certificates are up. In fact, certificates are really hot for undergraduates, for associates, and even for graduate programs. So go ahead. I'll wrap this section up by saying nationwide, there is a movement toward single accreditation within community college systems and consolidation. And I mean, this preceded recent movements. When you look at, like I was talking about Pennsylvania, I also lived in Indiana with Ivy Tech, which was a single system, North Houston, Lone Star, Tarrant County, and Fort Worth. Texas has really been trying to move toward consolidation. Now they're so big, they have multiple systems that are trying to consolidate that are separate from each other. And I think you have a guest speaker coming from Texas in the Dallas College example, which is quite illuminating in terms of the strategic nature of that work and how efficient they were. So Maricopa, this is sort of a before and after pre-consolidation work. 20,000 students, they were losing students. They had 10 colleges, 8,000 employees, but they had budget deficits. They had operating deficits. They were losing some money from the state. They were losing students. They had that redundant organizational structure. So they merged and jointly accredited, and through shared services and budget cuts and changing some of the locations and hubs in terms of communities of leadership, they were able to grow the number of students, grow the number of jobs, and have $4 million in savings. So that was one case study. The next slide I have 3 more slides, and these are really for reference purposes. I'm going to summarize kind of the key takeaways. Dallas College, I think you're going to have described to you in great detail. It again, I heard that presentation. I've also seen it in other community colleges who are doing reports as they've been analyzing the same topic. And it's really a best practice in terms of strategic leadership, keeping students in mind, reinvesting in the system, and making positive changes. Also in Texas was the Texas State Technical College system. They had hundreds of thousands of dollars. They didn't have an exact number, but they got rid of the overheads and the redundancies. They actually felt that they responded closer to the workforce demands and better alignment, because this is a very important point. If you have a small campus, it may not be able to offer all the same things as your big campus. But if you're all one, you can offer all the programs, increase the hybrid and online delivery, and then you could actually serve a local community even better because you would have a broader offering for that small community. You can see another example was in Seattle, and that one was more a smaller number. I think it was maybe 2 or 3. It was 3 that came together for efficiencies, and they really touted the outcomes in terms of students' earnings and graduations. Go to the next slide, please. Maine Community College, Los Angeles Community College. Los Angeles was a little less. It wasn't about merging institutions. It was merging functions. It was more shared service. Always another option, always makes sense, can be done also in conjunction with a consolidation or not. Arkansas did some consolidation across campuses and resource allocations, 2 more, New Hampshire and Connecticut. I think you're going to hear from Connecticut. That was a pretty large consolidation into a single institution, and that was a bold, challenging move. But I heard the speaker talk about pros and cons, but some of the pros were the power to make unified decisions, to go to market together with joint messaging and single marketing campaigns, the power to influence because you have a bigger base and one voice, but also allow autonomy for delivery on a local basis. So as I summarize this section, the themes that we saw in our research preparing for educating the presidents and for this session is that one of the key drivers for benefits, which is probably quite logical, would be cost efficiency. Basically removing, eliminating redundancies and sharing best practices across multiple institutions, not making them do all those investments themselves. It really does speak loudly. Now, it doesn't mean you decrease the investment. You should increase the investment in student outcomes with that money, again, like the Dallas College model. Program offerings, I already spoke to that, the ability to offer more than just a local set of offerings through consolidation and single accreditation, and increasing enrollment and outcomes. They are seeing, most of these institutions are seeing rises in graduation, retention, and employment. There are some challenges, and you can address these as you go through mitigation, or it can influence your decision about whether to go this way. But some are concerned about the institutional identity. Now, there's a cost to having a local identity with a different name. Some people are attached to that, and they really like that local identity. So you could lose that if everyone was under a same name, but a branch campus, or you can maintain some of the identity through a branch campus site. But that is one topic. It is hard to do this too. It will take work. It will be painful, like any change. It will cost money. And you have to go through the tougher changes like you've done before as a system and come out very strong. And then impact on students and community. It can disrupt life. It makes people not sure of if they're caught in between the transition, what it means for them. So that summarizes section 2. The last section, you know the system a lot better than I do. I just wanted to understand a little bit as I was working with the presidents, including the system, in terms of thinking this through. But it's pretty impressive that 40% of the collegiate students in Kentucky are at a community college. So you're having impact for sure. You are a player. Now it's dispersed in terms of your voice, your message, your impact, but collectively it's very important to Kentucky. So I find that impressive. I also think you're closely aligned with Kentucky's needs. So if you look at this chart, the size of the chart is the relative size of the GDP of a sector. Manufacturing is the biggest, and it's growing. Hospitality is growing the most, even though it's small. Healthcare, business, and professional services are all dark in terms of growth, and you offer programs for those sectors. So the more you can focus on high growth needs of Kentucky, the better. Just learning more about you in terms of how you're doing in training and education, how many companies you work with, the fact you're already offering credentials and certificates and licensure. 3 million have received training through the workforce solution. You should be very proud of the work and very excited about thinking about the next 10, 20 years for the system. You do have challenges, no doubt. The high cost and pressure to stay affordable is evidenced by the negative operating margins on your campuses. And it's hard to keep tuition low, which is a big priority, without putting an even bigger burden on the state. You got complex administrative processes that vary by location. There's been some disconnection between the system and the campuses. I think some progress is being made there. Resource allocation, strategically making investments in the top areas that would have cascading effects is hard to do, again, on a decentralized basis. And then getting even more alignment with the workforce, thinking of the new offerings and analytics and data and new healthcare positions. I just saw an article about how important it is to have programs on EV. We're making major investments in EV electric vehicles across North Carolina, for example. So you got an interesting layout here. This is the circle size is enrolled students. You got a couple big hubs, and then you've got some smaller ones. Poor little Henderson, you can barely even see its dot. I'm not trying to call them out, but I asked my team, where's the Henderson dot? And it's there over on the left above there. But you got quite a variance in size and location, which is problematic in some regards, but could be synergistic if you start thinking of some regional alignment in terms of serving students. And then this slide, I'm starting to wrap up now, shows the growth projections. Not all, in fact, only 6 or 7 of your institutions are projected, maybe 7 here, maybe it's even 8, are projected to have growth over the next decade. So you do have some pockets of growth. The darker one, looks like Gateway has the highest percentage, a 22% growth. Must be something exciting going on there. Nearby there, I didn't create these assumptions. I'm using data provided by your team, but I wanted to look at it in terms of growth. Now, the other ones who are not shown here are not expected to have growth. I think basically as a system, you're pretty flat. Those are what the projections are, with some pockets of growth, and you would incorporate that in your planning. This shows the change by campus. So the ones in the red are actually projected as a percentage to decrease. So you would also multiply that for a weighted factor on the number of enrollments. But you can see there are a number that throughout the state are good. You would want to consider this whichever way you go with your strategies. So I think I'm about 25 minutes in. I think that's my last slide. I could be wrong. Let's see if there's another one. Okay.
Thank you, Dr. Frigga. And just note, those last couple slides of the map, the locations were not correct across Kentucky, but thank you for pulling this together on short notice. He did spend a day with us last week. But Mr. Chairman, if it's okay, I'd like for this time to be for Q&A from our regents with Dr. Frigga's expertise.
Yeah, and I'll start by saying I apologize about the locations of the dots in the campuses. We'll get that fixed. I'm pretty sure the most important data was the size of the bubbles, and I know that that is right based on the data we received, but apologies for that.
I think Regent Finan.
Yes, yes. Thank you, Dr. Frigga. I think this is very interesting and I think applicable to the situation we find ourselves. And I think the thing that resonated with me was the population clip, that it's not just Kentucky, it's across the country. And so everyone is facing, I guess, what I'll call an opportunity for talent attraction. I mean, clearly KCTCS is formed to develop the workforce of the future, but without the population, without the talent, it becomes quite a mission. And so I think my question is, what across the board have you seen that has been maybe inspiring in terms of how a community college can actually become a talent attractor for their community at large? Given that that's such a big, broad issue that is facing so many of us, I'm sure when I hear the Penn State example, I just wonder if they were able to attract new students as a result of the changes they made to their system. Can you cite any examples that might be an inspiration for us?
Yeah, you should have a goal, quite frankly, of drawing more students from out of state into your community college system. It looks like you have a jewel of a system, but I can tell you on a decentralized marketing budget with people sending out individual messages of come to our campus, that's pretty difficult to do. Mm-hmm. That the more collective you get in marketing investments and more professionally done with a firm, for example, and a website that's all cohesive and social media, the more impact you can have on making people aware of what you already have. So there's a marketing piece that answers your question that can be aided by larger marketing budgets, which would be thought of collectively. The second thing would be product introduction. So you have to continually come out with new relevant products that the employers want. And the more you work with employers to generate relevant programs for them, the better. The other thing you'll need to do to be fiscally responsible is program reviews. So you can't just have an endless number of new programs and not get rid of other programs. Mm-hmm. You literally have to look at the economics and the student interest and the employer interest in some programs, and you need to sunset them. And that's hard to do because the people teaching those don't ever want them to go away. So no one's going to say, hey, get rid of my program. But you have to be ruthless and say, let's discontinue. And as a board, you would say, we want a program review, and we want you to eliminate the 10% worst performing that are not aligned with industry and introduce 10% new over the next 2 years. I'm making these numbers up. Yeah. But that sort of thinking of you need better products and you need to tell it better, and that will have impact. You should also continuously, I heard that you've done some economic development impact. You should continue to tell about the true economic impact of your system, of the schools, and that should be communicated. You also need widely, and also you need to do some education of state legislatures who may not be keeping up with trends like you all are in these kind of sessions, and we got to educate them about things that are happening and the impact you're having.
Thank you.
Brianna?
I believe Joe was first if he wants to go. I think he
Okay.
beat me to the punch.
Hey, Joe.
Thank you. And thank you, Dr. Frigga. A couple questions. I loved all the macro stuff. The macro stuff was amazing. It shows us the bigger picture. I would love to see some of that macro stuff in the micro, in our situation here specifically, just to see, some of the differences, where we're at, because we're looking at changing us, not the country. Like if we were to get like the weak to moderate financial position, you estimate that we were probably in the weak to moderate range. I think we track those numbers. Maybe someone from finance could answer that. But couldn't we get our own chart that shows the same thing, or where we line up on there? Just for our knowledge to see if we're actually strong, moderate, or weak, maybe for another meeting or another presentation of some time, just so we know the possibility.
So if you're asking me, those data exist, and I'm sure that your system team and I've seen it and helped them summarize some of it. So that is something you should probably explore. You want to understand the individual economics of each school. I don't think there was an interest. I don't think we had time to get. I was mostly focused on macro for this, but in the future, those data exist and should be looked at. I agree.
Awesome. Great. Thank you.
And Dr. If you don't mind, just to make you aware, we have developed a quick response research team just for the joint resolution. So if you as Regents have specific questions that you want us to research and get back to you in a very fast, quick manner, let us know. So we'll put that down as research question number 1. So we have the resources in-house to answer these questions for you.
Awesome. Thank you. Second, when it comes to student outcomes, when you're going to your case studies, I didn't see any actual student outcomes in those case studies. I saw some general, this is what we're planning to do, this is where we're going, but I didn't see any like enrollment rates or graduation rates or retention rates, 2-year persistence rates, nothing I would consider actual student outcomes. Is that data available as well for those case studies?
There are a few that have been in place long enough to have some outcomes. You'd have to go into some like 10 years back to really see how, because a big changes like this take 2 to 3 years to do. And then it's going to be a few years, obviously, before you impact graduation rates for sure, and even retention rates. So the ones I cited were a bit more on the recent side. But I imagine, again, that these data do exist. Anecdotally, when I ran my AI searches, and this is changing everything, every speech I do, I'm telling you, there are claims of positive impacts on outcomes, but you would want to put some empirical evidence. The dollars of efficiencies are probably much easier to quantify, and you can probably, although you will still have to see those a bit over time, given the fact that if it involves changes in personnel, there might be severance or some delayed benefits that would come the next year. So I would say it's a bit more delayed, but those are the right questions to be asking.
Awesome, thank you. Just one more clarification with me on your capacity calculations. How are those calculated on that slide?
Yeah, that was work done by EY Parthenon. They took the institutions and the capacity of the institutions in terms of seats that could be filled, it became available seats, and then they took their actual enrollments and then compared that. So it probably two different sources for the data of that calculation.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I was just wondering, I was looking at that. One more, I'm sorry to occupy your time. I'm sure the other Regents have more questions. Sorry, Brianna. You sure you're on first? Let's see my notes here. The college closure since 2004, it only lists private organizations. I assume we want to look at public as well over a period of time to see how that's.
Yeah, there are publics. The majority of closures. So I mentioned there were smaller publics across the country who were closing. Also some community colleges. Sometimes they're part of a system and they may not report it as a separate closure, but a campus closure. So those data are out there as well. This is just the most commonly reported because privates are where you're seeing more of it. There are exit barriers to public closures.
Gotcha.
It's much more likely to see consolidations where something stays there because it's so connected to the public, that rather than massive closures like you'll see in private industry, private higher ed.
Thank you. I appreciate your presentation. I will not take any more of your time.
Well, I appreciate your questions and the Diet Mountain Dew or regular Mountain Dew that you're drinking there. That's the drink of champions in the afternoon. I do the same thing.
Dr. Frigo, which begs the question, are you sure you're not from Kentucky? Because I think that's the drink of Kentuckians.
Well, I'm pretty close to Kentucky.
Thank you for your presentation. I'm Brianna Witten. I'm the General Education Faculty Regent. So that's kind of the view that I'm coming from. One of the questions I have, we have heard the word single system accreditation for years as faculty and staff, and of course everyone's hackles go up. So, I've noticed in a couple of the different consolidations, some that you referenced, specifically Connecticut, there was a lot of backlash in Connecticut with faculty and staff. I believe some votes of no confidence, and it's been quite an upheaval there. So I guess the primary question I'm asking is, how do you smooth those transitions if that is something, of course, that eventually gets considered, but also, is there somebody who is closer to us demographically, population size? I mean, I see Arkansas on there, that we could kind of make more of a comparison to. I know we've already had a presentation from Ivy Tech some months ago, probably plus 12 months ago at this point. And I know they are kind of aligned with us kind of system size wise and things like that. But is there somebody from your list? I think you had like 8 on there that I kind of quickly saw that you brought up. I mean, just, I guess any kind of advice like that we could kind of move forward with.
Yeah, two things. One, I believe this committee that's been formed has been looking for a while and will continue to look for deeper dives in terms of systems that have gone through this and best practices and outcomes, as you referred to. I mean, even Connecticut, it was it's even bigger in some regards. The concept of resistance, major change will always bring resistance. So there's no way that you can do major change, even if it's for the good of the system, without having some resistance of faculty, staff, politicians. There will be people who resist it. There's no doubt. Part of that is due to the fact that they think their local focus and control issues are going to be negatively impacted, and that they're representing a constituent perspective. Others just don't like change. As humans, we tend not to like change too much, and we're uncertain. And if it involves possible job loss, absolutely, I'm going to be nervous about this kind of change. So you would expect resistance. The best thing you can do is just what you're doing. You got a great system leader here who is approaching this with data, using the leaders of the institutions in the process of discovery. We've done some surveys with them. We're getting aligned. We're seeing where they stand. So the more inclusive you can be, and the more broad in terms of consideration you can be, the better. This meeting, this education, this communication is another step toward that. But then you're going to still have naysayers. So as things start moving toward a change, involving them in the process, finding out alternative routes, but ultimately you will never please everyone. But you need to listen to everyone who's affected and make the best decisions. This is what I thought the presidents did so well. When we met with them, we said, think at the system level. What's good for the system and the state and the citizens, not just your local perspective. So all of that is challenging, and I'm sure will be.
Sure. And to that second question, which I kind of snuck in there, similar in scope to us based on the ones that you mentioned, right? I mean, like I said, we've heard from Ivy. And I know we're going to hear from Connecticut today. But I'm just kind of looking for something that resembles more of a Kentucky look. And just really, I'm asking for your professional opinion. I'm not going to hold you to it. I just curious your ideas.
You'll find the Dallas presentation pretty interesting because there's a lot of the same dimensions. Realize Dallas is so darn big, it's multiple Kentuckys. So the fact that this is one system that essentially merged together they don't have the geographic spread, but there were some real clear lessons that would apply. So I think you'll find that one particularly relevant. Connecticut as well. And always be paying attention to the harder lessons they learned when they went through the process and what they might have done differently to make it smoother, to some of your concerns.
Thank you so much.
I do think I might be over my time, and I don't want to mess up the agenda, but I've offered to stay connected, to help research, to do anything that's necessary to move this forward. So we'll wait to see whatever comes out of this day and into the future. I hope to reconnect with you all as needed in this journey.
Well, we really appreciate it, Mr. Friga.
Thank you, Paul. And Mr. Chairman, if it's okay with you, I'll introduce the next speaker.
Yes, please do.
Thank you, Dr. Friga. Up next, we're going to hear from Connecticut. But before we do, unfortunately, Joe May from the Dallas system is stuck in the air due to flight delays, but Dr. Newberry is collecting his notes from the 2 presentations he's given us, and he's going to give us maybe a 5-minute recap of Dallas as well. But up next is Dr. John Maduco. He's the inaugural president of the Connecticut State Community College. As you all may know, a governor-led effort to merge and consolidate the multiple community colleges in Connecticut resulted into a brand new institution. It serves 70,000 students across 20 locations. And Dr. Maduco is responsible for carrying forth this, as he was hired after the decision was made to do this. And he had a fascinating presentation to PLT just not long ago. So please welcome President Maduco.
Hey, good afternoon, everyone. Good to see esteemed colleagues in Connecticut. Though I grew up in Los Angeles, I'm actually a volunteer by birthright. So I was born and raised in Nashville. So good seeing fellow Southerners. I will share my screen. I have a presentation to assist the Regents with what I will share. So give me 1 second, and then I will ask if you can see the presentation on your end. So please confirm if you can see it on your end.
Not? Yep, there we go.
Okay. Awesome. Great. John Maduco, president of Connecticut State Community College. I'm really happy to be here. Connecticut State Community College, our nickname is CT State. We've been in existence since July 1st of last year. So we're one of the newest community colleges and really just institutions of higher education in the country. And to Dr. Friga's comments earlier, it was definitely a massive undertaking to land this plane. So July 1st of last summer, Connecticut State Community College, we became the largest community college in New England and actually in the northeastern United States. So we're the largest community college in New England, New York, and Pennsylvania, serving north of 70,000 students. So when you look at the entire higher education landscape in Connecticut, 1 out of 4 undergraduate students is a CT State student. Right, so 25%, we're proud of that. We have about 22 locations across the great state of Connecticut and counting. And as a result of our merger and consolidation, 1 application for admissions, right? So, community colleges, we hang our hat on accessibility, 1 financial aid application, again, the accessibility, and then really access to, for students to all locations across the state. We have an aligned and unified curriculum as well. So I'll give an overview of just how we got here. So the timeline, really even before April of 2017, our former governor, Governor Malloy, who's now actually the chancellor of the University of Maine system, he really kind of just set the tone in terms of his expectation for the merger of the 12 community colleges. And actually, prior to that, at the beginning of his gubernatorial administration, he actually led the merger of the 4 state universities. So that's Eastern, Central, Southern, and Western, with the 12 legacy community colleges and with 1 online state college to form the Connecticut State Colleges and University System, right? So there was actually a merger that came before the merger, the decision to merge the community colleges. So in April 27, our Board of Regents voted to consolidate Connecticut's 12 legacy community colleges into a singly accredited institution. And from that point through March of 2022, there were unsuccessful rounds with our accreditors. So our accreditors, NETCHI, the New England Commission of Higher Education, there were different iterations of what this quote unquote structure would be, right, in terms of the merger and consolidation. And repeatedly, the accreditor was like, no, like, they're not having it in terms of some of their concerns that they have with their respective 9 standards of accreditation that touch on finance and resources, to academic portfolio, to governance, and et cetera. So it took nearly 6 years, March of 2022, where the accreditor, after years of rejections, formally approved the finalization of the merger. And with that approval, they require 3 progress reports that really outline how the system and ultimately the college addressed specific nuances per those 9 standards of accreditation. June of 22, the founding president, myself, was hired, and I was given a charge by our Board of Regents and our system chancellor to basically land this plane. So, this is a really, very PG kind of version of what took place in Connecticut. Connecticut was in the news for years, right? So this absolutely met resistance from really everyone, from our faculty, from our staff, from our students, from our unions, from some legislators, from our state university leaders. There was a lot of concern. And, Connecticut, one of the original 13 states in this country, Connecticut's very colonial, right? So Connecticut has 169 individual cities and towns or municipalities, right? There are no functional county governments in Connecticut, right? So Connecticut is about independence, and Connecticut is about local autonomy and identity, right? So you have 169 fiefdoms, right? And in Connecticut, everything is local, right? And there's been about 60 plus years of community college history in the state of Connecticut. Like I mentioned, July 1st, we formally received our approval from our accreditor. And then September 2023, we secured approval from the United States Department of Education to provide Title IV programs under a single OPE ID number. So basically the ability to offer financial aid for our students. So I want to talk about, the accomplishments and challenges, and I've shared this with your team for later reference. I want to start with the challenges, right? So you had the process, this multi-year, nearly 7-year process to merge Connecticut's 12 community colleges. And in the middle of that, you had the COVID-19 pandemic, right? So you just had this collision course. So to finalize the final elements of the merger, the majority of workforce is telecommuting, right? Significantly challenging, right? I mentioned earlier, very public resistance to the merger, protests, right? Shouting matches at the Board of Regent meetings, articles upon articles, not only local, but national in terms of just the resistance to this. I mean, this is the epitome of change. Second only to Arizona, Connecticut suffered the second largest degree of enrollment declines in the United States, right? Where in 1 year alone, we lost 20,000 students, right? So enrollment decline was significant. The legacy student degree process, right? So we had a lot, tens of thousands of legacy students now continuing their degree progress in the new aligned degrees. And there have been challenges with that. The original design was overly centralized, right? Overly centralized, where reporting lines were reporting to our version of a system office, really pulling that local autonomy away. New initiative fatigue, right? So there were at least 50 plus initiatives that were going at once, having to merge the student information system across the 12 legacy colleges, aligning the curriculum, aligning all policy, aligning the programmatic accreditation. So from nursing and many of the allied health programs, right? Aligning the finances, right? Really trying to mitigate the 12 independent foundations, which we decided not to merge the foundations. So we have 12 separate foundations that are aligned with our 12 main branch campuses. The Northeastern United States, unlike any other region in the country, is suffering a significant demographic cliff, right? In terms of people are leaving the Northeastern United States. One of the main reasons or justifications to merge the 12 legacy community colleges was there was a structural financial deficit for many of the community colleges where they were not balancing their budget. So you had that issue. And then last but not least, just the growing pains of a large and nebulous and arduous new institution. Now that's the challenge, and that's the short list. In terms of the successes, one student information system, right? So one platform that houses all of our data across the state. Really significant. I mentioned one admissions application, one FAFSA application. The aligned curriculum, I think this is one of the more innovative and substantial successes of our institution, to align the curricula of 12 legacy colleges into one, right? That's really significant, because I know, Chancellor Emeritus May, I know of him during my time in Texas, but Connecticut also dealt with swirler students. Connecticut's very competitive, right? So swirler students are those students who are bouncing between the individual colleges, right? But the one version of English 101 isn't necessarily accepted or recognized at a different college, right? So you had a lot of students bouncing between the colleges. It's different curriculum. You had to reapply. You had to apply to a different college if, let's say, life happened. You had to reapply for FAFSA. You had to get your transcripts from the previous college transferred to another college, right? So really, the students were stuck in the middle. We funded and staffed a guided pathways advisors model. So historically, the student to advisor ratio was anywhere from 500 to 750 students to one advisor. So there was a significant investment made initially with ARPA funds and ultimately with institutional funds to reduce that ratio down to 250 students to one advisor, right? Like really significant, really going all in on hiring hundreds of advisors. The state of Connecticut, so per Governor Lamont's administration, per our Connecticut General Assembly, really passed and adopted a packed free tuition program to all Connecticut residents. And it's expanded in its scope and size year over year, right? So it's for full-time students, for part-time students, it's for new community college students, it's for returning community college students, and it's for students enrolled in both certificate and associate degree programs, right? So it's been a game changer for us. Students that have received the free tuition financial benefits, we've seen an increase in graduation, we've seen an increase in retention and persistence. So it's absolutely been a game changer in our state, and has absolutely stabilized our enrollment. We have general education reformation. So like with many community colleges, you have students that are stuck in developmental education, right? So our Board of Regents passed basically ACME, right? Really a reformation of Gen Ed, where we're adopting a co-requisite model, and we're seeing inroads, increases in terms of not only course completion, but those students getting into college level courses. We increased our reserves, right? So we have healthy reserves. We expanded our public safety to be more equitable across our campuses. And last but not least, and this was recognized in the Washington Post, we expanded our mental health services to ensure that there's a licensed mental health counselors on all of our main campuses, right? So those are just the short list of the accomplishments and challenges. Now, what were the reasons? I mentioned financial, I mentioned the swirler students, but also too, just the student experience, right? The student experience, right? For first generation students, to navigate 12 colleges and 12 different sets of policies was becoming really challenging, for people here in Connecticut. So a bold decision was made. So as a result, we're Connecticut State Community Colleges. What does this mean? We are the largest provider of workforce development in the state of Connecticut, second to no one. Right, so we are at the center of Governor Lamont's Workforce Development Council, where we are partnered And we work with every state agency. We work with all major employers. Like we are in terms of ensuring that we're driving the needs of our great state. You know, in the state of Connecticut, 70% of our jobs require some form of post-secondary education. So we know that's significant, and we ourselves are experiencing a workforce shortage, you know, in our state. And the three main areas of focus per our governor is nursing and allied health, manufacturing, and information technology. So we're open access, right? So here's some student demographics for our newly formed institution. 98% of our students are Connecticut residents, right? 88% of our students are in associate degree seeking programs, right? So our bread and butter is 2-year degree programs because the majority of our students want to transfer to a 4-year institution. 73% of our students receive some form of financial aid, so that free tuition program or conventional Title IV funding or local state grants. 67 or 2/3 of our students are first-generation college students, right? So we absolutely are the first opportunity for not only our students, but their entire families to experience college. 2/3 of our students are part-time, right? Because 70% of our students are working. They are employed. They are the firefighters. They are the parents. They are the nurses. They are the techs, et cetera. 60% of our students are students of color. So we are a minority serving institution of higher education, and 32% of our students are adult learners. And with that, 90% of our graduates remain in Connecticut, right? So no other institution in the state of Connecticut can say that. So again, we really drive the workforce pipeline in our great state. In terms of our workforce, so as a result, you know, I've been hearing questions about like, what's the benefit, right? What is that value proposition? It's workforce development. So we enroll nearly 4,000 allied health and nursing students a year. We have a significant nursing shortage, like the majority of states, right? So we are the #1 pipeline feeder of healthcare, you know, early, you know, entry-level, mid-level healthcare professionals, right? 5,000 nurses have graduated over the past 5 years, right? 2,500 students in IT, and that number is wrong. We've checked our numbers. It's about 2,500 manufacturing students. The #1 industry in the state of Connecticut is manufacturing, right? We're big in defense, right? So we make submarines here. You know, we make aircraft. You know, we make fighter jets, right? We make Black Hawk helicopters, right? So manufacturing is a generations upon generations long standalone industry in the state of Connecticut, and we're proud to be the #1 provider of manufacturing training and education in our great state. I see a hand that's raised. Please feel free to ask questions. Go ahead.
Hey, thank you very much. It's my hand, and I apologize, but I wanted to pause on this slide for a second. Can you talk a little bit about partnerships you may have with health systems around your nurse and allied health professional program, and also how many of those people are retained within your state in the nursing and allied health?
Yeah. So again, over 90% of our graduates, so that includes those that go into the healthcare and nursing profession, remain in the state of Connecticut. So we don't have a challenge like our universities, losing our talent to neighboring states or whatever. So we're proud about that. In terms of the allied health and nursing, and I'm a physician by trade, right? So I am biased when it comes to healthcare. We are partners with all of them, right? We're partners with 100% of the healthcare systems in the state of Connecticut, bar none. And they are chomping at the bit to get their hands on more of our nursing students. They've invested in our programs to allow us to expand our programs, not only in terms of the cohorts, but also funding to hire more nursing faculty, right? Because the nursing educators is typically a challenge. Expanding clinical site access, right? And really making it seamless, for our students, where our students have a job before they graduate, right? And so that's something that we can absolutely, provide to our students. And the starting salary for an RN with a 2-year degree in the state of Connecticut is about $86,000, right? So we know that is a family-sustaining career here in Connecticut. So, healthcare is king in Connecticut, and we're proud about that.
Yeah, I appreciate that. So are all of the health systems that participate there, are they providing rotation type experiences, residency type experience, as well as financial resources to the university?
Yeah, absolutely. So in terms of investing in our foundations, in terms of scholarship dollars, investing directly into the institution regarding funding to supplement hiring more nursing faculty, and in terms of, unlimited clinical spots and locations for our students, right? So it's really been, the challenge is to provide them more. That's the challenge, and that's a good challenge to have.
Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Couple more slides. So what we've seen from this first year as a unified, consolidated, singly accredited, multi-site community college is that without really pushing, 30% of our students statewide are taking courses at more than one campus location, right? Because often a student will live in one location, work is in another location, kids are going to school in another location, or what have you. So it's been beautiful for students who, in the state of Connecticut, it's definitely, segregated in terms of some people just stay in their corner of the state. And now you're seeing students explore different campuses because different campuses have a different offering or variation of programming and services. So that's been great. So 31% of our students are taking classes in person, 44% are hybrid, and 25% of all students are taking courses online. And we know online education is here to stay. So we believe that we are the epitome of access. And we're the epitome of we bring the education to our students. And again, we recognize that, 45% of our students are caretakers to someone, a child, a parent, or what have you, right? So being able to access education and our services from wherever they are in Connecticut, it's really a big deal. We're expanding dual enrollment, right? So second only to UConn, so University of Connecticut, national champion winners. That's a flagship university here in our state. Second only to UConn, we provide a second most dual enrollment opportunities in the state of Connecticut. So about 8,000 plus students. It's about 30% of all dual enrollment opportunities in the state, and we're looking to expand. Connecticut does not have a codified dual enrollment opportunity. So I know that from the governor to our legislature, they know that we're at the core because we're everywhere. We have locations everywhere. We are very diverse, and we want to expand this because this is a growth opportunity for us here in Connecticut. And then lastly, too, as a result, we are the most affordable education option in the state of Connecticut. Right, 52% of our students pay nothing as it pertains to tuition and fees because of that free tuition program that we offer, right? And we have robust financial aid services in addition to 12 great foundations. So we do a great job on driving down the cost. So a cost per semester hovers above $2,500 a semester, so about $5,000 a year for 2 long semesters is a tuition that we have. And that's before free tuition program, that's before Pell, that's before financial aid, that's before scholarships. So really proud about that. So that's it for, for an overview. I do want to share, listening to the questions, and no two states are the same. And I would really caution your system and your esteemed colleagues that, yes, glean best practices, but I would really glean the mistakes that systems made. I really focus on on the mistakes because Kentucky's Kentucky, right? Kentucky's not the other 49 states right? So you guys have your own nuances and own dynamics. I think the mistakes coming into this role that we had to pivot within our first year was one, overly centralized, and that really stripped away local autonomy. Like I said, all things are local. I just don't think that's a battle that's worth it. I think you centralize the mission, the vision, the values, the financial standards and policy, but it's okay to have local nuance. Here in Connecticut, we have campuses that are rural, we have campuses that are in our urban centers, we have campuses that are in our suburbs, and they're all different. And that's okay. And I think the faculty and staff and the community partners adjacent and near those campuses really respect that. So that's one. I think initiative fatigue. It's easy to look at a white paper that's promising the world in terms of savings, in terms of pathways and what have you. I think being really conservative and measured, right? What are those things that are necessary to land the plane, to secure single accreditation, to really start a merged organization, right? And then in a phased approach, begin to do things at once. Here, we were doing everything at once. I think that was a very significant mistake. I think the next mistake was, and I'm not casting aspersions on former leaders and former elected officials, but 7 to 8 years ago, the promise was this was going to be cost savings and basically cost neutral. That is impossible. There are too many moving parts, from technology the policy, the moving people around, and undoing and building things from the ground up, that is costly. So it's really important that at the core of this are your financial leaders really budgeting and really assessing how much is this going to cost, not only financially, but in terms of manpower, right? Like really being honest there. And then last but not least, I think, simplify it. You guys are accredited by SAC-COC. So when I worked in Texas, Georgia, and Florida, I know SAC-COC, I know Bell Whelan. Really allow the standards of the accreditation to drive this work, right? So that you're addressing every standard to say, we have an example of academic rigor and academic policy and governance and et cetera. So, those are the missteps that we made, over promising versus underselling, right? So really being conservative and really listening to your people so they feel that they're at the table. Though I recognize the legislature is pushing this, but I think in terms of the implementation and execution and planning, really ensuring that through the spirit of shared governance, your faculty, your staff, your alumni, your students, even your foundation members have a seat at the table, right? And they're lending their expertise and they're lending their sensibilities to this process. I'll be honest, I wasn't confident that we were going to get accredited as I took the helm. It wasn't until we really secured and formalized our shared governance structure statewide, where faculty and staff participated in statewide elections, that was one of the main barriers that we had to get over, right? So again, I wish you well. This is not perfect. Change, there will be resistance to change. And like anything, there are going to be people who are going to be mad about this for the next 50 years. So I would really center your work and your efforts around the student experience, right? And the why that's tied to your mission that I know all of you are committed to, right? If you make it about the students, it makes this a very a more doable process. If you make it about pleasing everyone, I just think that's an impossible task. So I want to stop right now. I really want to kind of just provide more time for questions and comments, but I really appreciate the opportunity to share our experiences with you.
Russ, do you still have your hand up?
I'm sorry, I've still got it out, but I don't have it up.
Okay. Okay, Candace?
Thank you. Well, I appreciate the presentation and I very much appreciate the transparency and the honesty. I think focusing on lessons learned is so important for everyone. So I thank you for sharing that. My question sort of piggybacks off of what Russ was talking about. Talk to us about the partnerships with industry and how important is that to be aligned? And, we heard from the prior speaker about tailoring programs, et cetera, and how are you focused on that and how central is that to your success?
Yeah, workforce is everything. I mean, when we have, general, Electric Boat, right? Electric Boat's a global leaders in making submarines. They just christened the submarine about 2 months ago. So we had U.S. senators and the highest levels of military at this public event. And for them to say, without Connecticut State Community College, we're not here, right? So that's a big deal in terms of, for 60 years, you had to deal with 12 individual colleges that are also fighting each other. And now it's centralized. And now we can speak to workforce in scale, right? So when workforce is saying we have thousands, if not tens of thousands of shortages over the course of 10 years, now we can speak to that volume versus trying to go individual locations. I think too, we are still regional as a state, right? So we've really looked at our campus and our offerings and avoided duplication. And wherever industry is and what their bread and butter in terms of programming and training, we're working towards aligning the campuses with that need. Right. So that's 2. And then 3, we have 4 regional workforce boards. Some states are different. They have 1 workforce commission. We have 5 workforce boards. And per Governor Lamont, each workforce board is assigned a specific sector. So 1 will be IT, 1 will be healthcare and nursing. And that actually makes it easier for us to partner, for us to better align our curriculum, for us to align our faculty with advisory board members. So that's been helpful. And then last but not least, making the value proposition for industry to invest in us. I think so often, for community colleges nationally. We are affordable because we're subsidized, and someone's subsidizing our tuition and fees. It can be local appropriations, state appropriations, or something. So really helping industry understand that, for us to ramp up and scale to their needs, they really have to invest in us. But it's been a much easier process now to work with industry because, again, they're less confused on who to go to. They know where the front door is, and they know ultimately, the buck stops with me in terms of my expectations for myself and our institution to meet industry needs.
Great, thank you.
Yep.
Mr. Chairman, if you don't mind, if no one else has a question, there were two things that he mentioned at a previous meeting that, if you don't mind, President Maduco, what was the estimated cost to move to a singly accredited system? And then secondly, what's the size of your system office?
Yeah, so the estimated cost, and we're going to be telling that cost for years. So when I joined the institution, we were facing a significant structural deficit. So FY20, this current fiscal year, we were facing a $33.6 million deficit that we successfully closed that gap. There's significant and stringent budget mitigations. The following year, FY25, facing a $91 million structural deficit. The following year after that, $118 million deficit, right? So there was absolutely structural imbalance in terms of just what we were doing. And in partnership with the General Assembly, they've helped us close that gap. And through budget mitigation, we've actually slashed our out-year deficit by $50 million, right? By now a singly merged institution, eliminating duplication of services, eliminating duplication of procurement, right? Eliminating duplication of how we share staffing in certain roles across an institution. I would put the cost of this merger easily between $30 to $50 million, easily, right? Easily. Like really significant, because again, we're in the middle of the pandemic, in the middle of significant enrollment declines. In terms of the central office, our central office now is probably under 70 employees. And that was intentional. When I came here, and remember when I mentioned some of the challenges that we had, when I came here, the original design was heavily centralized, where the original design for CT State Community College was to have 95% of all employees report to the central office. And within 1 week, I said, that's absolutely insane for the state of Connecticut that's colonial and everything is local. There's no way we can manage our 6,700 employees from a central office. So over this past academic year, we've actually decentralized many of the reporting lines, but the original design had at least between easily 200 and 300 employees that were going to be hired for the central office. And when I came here, I threw that idea out the window. I said, absolutely not. That cannot happen. If we're going to make expenditures in personnel and services, those resources have to go to the campuses because that's where learning and that's where student support takes place. So I would really be mindful if you start to see plans and there's just a heavy headcount in the central office, right? Again, they're not seeing students and they're not facing the public. So, less is more. You can do more with less. And that's going to be a lightning rod politically with your legislators and with your campus stakeholders and your students. If all of a sudden they feel that an additional quote unquote institution is being built within your system office, I would absolutely avoid that and better leverage the leaders and the experts and personnel that you have on your campuses before adopting new administrators. Because again, it gets very costly, but politically it's just suicide.
Hey, Joe.
Not me this time. It's James Lee here.
Oh, sorry.
Yes, sir. You mentioned before about the financing. The statement was made that if you're hunting for a way to save a lot of money, you need to maybe rethink that. We have 16 colleges. Most of them, according to the information that I have seen, are financially surviving. Let's just say that. Nobody's making thing of financially surviving is, but we have some that are in financial difficulty. So basically, how do you sell the situation is that for those that are doing well and maybe those that are not, is what I'm saying is, because we have 16, and I just use an example, maybe 12 of them are financially secure and their information and their finances, but we have 3 or 4 because of enrollment and where they're located in the state are having financial difficulty. And so, you know, we represent all 16 community colleges.
Mhm.
And, you know, so I'm concerned about all 16 of them. So
Yeah.
how do you address things like that going forward compared to single accreditation and individual accreditation?
Yeah,
Thank you, sir.
yeah, absolutely. And that's a great question. And that was pressure not only applied to this entire process here in Connecticut, but I absolutely was fielding those questions and concerns from legislators and board members and employees and students alike. You know, my response to that was in the community college space, the idea of closing a campus, I'm not talking about a center or a satellite, closing a campus that has multi-decades of history and lineage with a local municipality, that's a declaration of war, have it be it's Kentucky or Connecticut. And that's something I won't prescribe to. And I told Governor Lamont, I said, I will not close a location, right? I think too, the mission of community colleges is that we're not a destination, we're in your backyard, right? So by closing a location, we're removing access to post-secondary education from a region or a county or a municipality, in this case in Kentucky. I think that goes against, you know, your values. I think 3, the strength of a unified organization is we and share versus the have and have not. So we had that. We had the healthy legacy colleges and we had the unhealthy colleges, right? Versus now it's a shared institution, and now we're sharing those resources. Say at the bare minimum, the basic needs and resources and amenities that employees and students need, we have to ensure that that's in place, right? So making that argument as one institution is much easier as 12, because I feel for maybe those 4 institutions right now that don't have the reserves and the finances as the bigger ones. And then my last point to that is the majority of our cost is personnel, and the pushback I have with legislators in all due respect and others is that when you look at the price point between us and universities charge more. Universities have ancillary revenue, right? Housing and et cetera. But the cost of doing business is actually similar between a community college and a university, because we still have to pay for faculty and staff and professionals and et cetera, right? So that delta is our price point, right? So I think when people are looking at costs, right, I think it's short-sighted. I think they don't recognize universities get to filter out individuals. They get to be very selective, right? As community colleges, we don't say no to anyone, right? So we're taking everyone, and that includes their needs, right? And people with more needs, that's more costly, right? So I think it's really, you know, the conversation and the argument you have to make is the parity, and it's serving the entire state of Connecticut versus picking between certain areas of the state. It goes against your values. So that's something I continue to push forward. But I think there's greater appreciation now in Connecticut because they see that, unlike other institutions, we serve the entire state.
In reference to your community colleges, as you said, the largest expense is faculty and staff, but the next big expense is structure or facilities. How do you address those? Because even in our more fluent community college, we have facilities that are not being used. So how do you get your hand around that, is because that isn't a big expense for every community college?
Yeah, great question. You know, about 83% of our expenditures is personnel. Personnel in Connecticut is just very expensive, and we do have underutilized space. I think it's an opportunity. It's an opportunity for co-op partnerships with K-12. So 3 of our campuses provide middle colleges where we have high schools embedded within 3 of our campuses, right? So that's a game changer. So those students are not only finishing their junior and senior year, what else are they doing? They're taking dual enrollment courses, right? So that's huge. You know, we partner with nonprofits to leverage our facilities. We partner with the Department of Labor to have American Job Centers on our campuses. 7 of our campuses have lab schools and childcare centers, right? So no other institution of the higher education state of Connecticut has more childcare services than CT State, and we're proud about this. I think there's a litany of opportunities that can really address community and industry need. And I think, your campus leaders now become entrepreneurs to become even more embedded within the surrounding communities and service areas.
Brianna.
So James Lee always steals my thunder. I was gonna ask about space utilization, but what have been some of the challenges, I guess, with that is a question I have.
The challenges, it has been really telling our story. So all of our campuses are owned by the state of Connecticut, right? Like we're not facing a structural deficit because of our facilities. It's our personnel. And again, we love our personnel and we support that. The facilities are the facilities. We own them outright. I think it's underutilization. I think for us, it's more funding, right? When you look at the funding of us compared to universities, it's not even comparable. University per student is getting more state funding than the lone community college here in the state of Connecticut, even though we're the largest institution, even though we serve a higher percentage of people, and even though we're the most inclusive, and that we're the driver of workforce development and industry in the state of Connecticut, right? So I understand the challenges in terms of facilities, and we've adopted more solar panels. We've eliminated gas reserves. We've absolutely partnered with our statewide utility providers for subsidies to drive down costs. So we've made inroads, right? But again, there's only so much of the bone that you can cut to the point where we start to cut our nose. And I really want to push back on that and say, maybe it's an opportunity for a community college to really reinvent itself in terms of better utilizing its space. And I would look at that through that lens versus, cutting, or the idea even closing and shuttering a campus. I just think that's deadly for a local community and that relationship that community is going to have with your respective system.
Thank you. Second question.
Yep.
So can you talk about the reaffirmation process? I know you're probably not in the 5th year, correct? So what's that going to look like? Like with us in SAC-COC, and each individual campus has to go through their own. So when we get to a single system accreditation, do you have any idea of what that's going to look like for you all?
Yes. So we have actually a focus visit next spring, right? So next spring will be the coming to the end of our 2nd year in existence, and it's focused on what we promised to work on throughout the process of the merger. So it's the completion of the reformation of Gen Ed. They want to see the completion of that. They want to look at our finances. How are we doing budget mitigation? Are we continuing to build our reserves and continuing to balance the budget? They're looking at certain levels of campus support. And then just overall student success metrics, right? So that's a focus visit. In the fall of 2027, we have our comprehensive visit, right? And that's the big one. Now the feedback from our accreditor is, yeah, we don't know how we're going to do your visit. We've never done a statewide singly accredited. So even the accreditor is like, we might have to send an army to do this site visit because we have 22 locations across the state, and we partner with 181 high schools. We partner all the high schools, in Connecticut, right? So it's actually going to be a challenge for SAC-COC because I don't think there's another singly accredited statewide community college in the Southeast. I could be wrong. I don't think it exists yet. So I think that's going to be a challenge, but I think that's an opportunity, right? Because SACS is going to learn from you guys in terms of what that looks like. There's definitely going to be grace because just the feasibility of trying to be everywhere during a 1-week period or a 4-day period to visit everyone is definitely going to be daunting, But again, the reformation process, for us, it's not even reformation, it's actually initial, right? It's a secure, we have the initial accreditation, but it's a security comprehensive and full accreditation. That's the big task. But our accreditor has been very helpful. And again, I think just inside baseball, our accreditor, their fingerprints are on this too. Right. So I always remind people, our legislature, our board members who are great to me, but also our accreditor, hey, we're all in this together in terms of the existence of the singly accredited statewide institution. And that has to be the type of conversation with SAC-COC, as well, in terms of their role is to support you, through this process, not to be adversarial through this process. And we really felt that our accreditor, NETU, every step of the way was supportive and was providing guidance to say, if you want to fulfill this criteria, we need to see this from you. Like, that was very helpful for us. And I would hope SAC COC and their entire team is providing that level of support to not only the system, but to the entire state of Connecticut.
Thank you, Dr. Maduka.
Barry,
Yeah,
one more if you'll allow me.
One quick question, Brianna.
Yeah, shared governance. I'm a faculty regent. So shared governance, how did that change? How did that shift? And feel free to email me your answer. But that is the big question, right? How did the shared governance? I imagine before you had individual senators and maybe a council of governance.
Yeah.
So how did that change going wide?
That was a linchpin. That was a linchpin, and we got that at the 11th hour. And we have 2 branches of shared governance: curricular Congress for our statewide curriculum, and then we have our college senate. I would absolutely focus on that and really make sure that your governance structure, yes, you're seeking to be statewide, do not make it too complicated and layered, because that's what we're going through right now, where there's too many layers, and we're seeing the frustration right now. So we're going to absolutely have to retool our governance so it's more seamless and effective for our stakeholders. But governance is key. As president, I'm ex officio, right? I'm ex officio. I'm really pushing our senators to really do God's work in terms of really supporting the institution. But that's been a really healthy relationship during our inaugural year. So governance is key. And again, I would share, we have our model, we have our structure, we have our bylaws that we're happy to share with the entire Kentucky team to support your endeavors.
Well, thank you. We really appreciate it, Dr. Maduka. I have one quick comment. It's very interesting that you are a clinical physician by trade, and you are now the president of the community college system. That's very interesting.
Yes, and for the record, I do not self-medicate, but again, it teaches me patience and endurance for sure. And again, I pray for all of you. I know you're doing good work, and I know the reasons behind this is for the people of Connecticut. But again, here in Connecticut, we are people of Kentucky, excuse me. But here in Connecticut, you have an ally and friends and colleagues in us. Please do not hesitate to let us know how we can be of assistance throughout this process for you.
We really appreciate it. And that $30 to $50 million is a lot of money, but based on your forecasting of this past year, next year, and the year after, you were losing on the average probably $90 to $100 million a year, right? Or going to?
I wouldn't say that. I think there's been just an imbalance in terms of state funding, and we're making that argument right now in terms of our legislature. And that $30 to $50 million mark, that includes ARPA funds and how the ARPA funds were used initially. And I would just be mindful. I'd be mindful in how you're budgeting and just undersell and be conservative. Do not promise 18% gains in any form of metric. Please be conservative. This is a multi-year process for all of you. Even when you secure a single accreditation, it's still going to take a decade to just stabilize something that's never been done in Kentucky. And that's the level of grace I really encourage you to give yourselves through this process.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, absolutely. Good seeing everyone. Take care.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, John. Been very helpful. Appreciate your help. Talk to you soon.
Yeah, be well. Take care. Bye-bye.
Okay, a little bit of a change up in the schedule, if you don't mind, Mr. Chairman. We have Ji-Heng Lee, who is going to be our fourth speaker. He decided to come in since Joe May has airplane issues. G is an expert on higher education governance. He serves as CEO of the Association of Community Colleges Trustees. And we believe, according to him, Kentucky is the only Regent governing board in the country with half votes. And so that's something I think that out of SJR that we need to fix and address. But also be thinking, Regents, about the role of the advisory boards as well as we talk about governance across the United States. So if you don't mind, please welcome Ji-Heng Lee. If you don't mind, 15 minutes or so, and we'll have a Q&A after that.
Okay. Well, good afternoon, everyone. It's great to see all of you. As the president mentioned, I'm Ji-Heng Lee. I'm the president and CEO of the Association of Community College Trustees, and it's great to be with all of you and Chair Martin and the rest of the KCTCS board. I've been asked to kind of give a presentation. I know that President Maduco, who's a good friend of mine, gave you kind of a description of what transpired with them. So what I'll do, since my time is limited, is trying to go through the kind of the types of governance and then talk about the state systems that appear through all of our nation's community colleges. So if you go to slide 2, Hannah, or whoever's controlling. So for ACCT purposes, we kind of see 3 different models for governance. So one, what we talk about is a governing board, and that governing board is the one who oversees all activity of the college. And in addition, has the important role of hiring and firing, in some cases, the president or the chancellor. Coordinating is it sets policies for institutions, including post-secondary institutions across the board. So for an example, Dr. Aaron Thompson, he's part of the coordinating board. Your KCTS is the governing board. And then there's an advisory board that functions, especially at the local level, to provide any type of support or feedback to the institution. As we get going through the kind of the governance structures, and if you go to the next slide, we see different ways that our trustees are either appointed, elected, or selected through a constituency or ex officio. So what we like to say at ACCT is that about 1/3 of our members are locally appointed, 1/3 of our members, and this is members colleges in general, are appointed at the statewide level, and 1/3 of them are elected primarily locally. And you also see some ex officio members, and when we start describing some of the state systems, especially states that are near you, you'll see a lot of ex officio members. And Dr. Maduco even mentioned that he's an ex officio member of his board. Next slide, please. Okay. So as we go through some of the systems, I start with one of the most complicated systems, and that's next slide. And that is our Minnesota State Colleges and Universities Board of Trustees. Dr. Maduco actually came out of our Minnesota system, ironically. So, and I say it's a little complicated because this is one of the systems that represents all community colleges, technical institutions, and four-year public institutions in the state. It does not represent the University of Minnesota. So that's the one bifurcation that exists for this system. As you can see here, they have 15 members, 3 student members, and then 12 members, and with 1 allocated to somebody representing labor. Now, when you take a look at this system in general, you go to the next slide. Like I said, they represent over 26 colleges, 54 campuses. They have no local structure. They have no advisory board. They have no governing board at the local level. Okay. And as I mentioned, the student representative what the thing is with that, each of the members of the board must be a resident of a congressional district, of each of the congressional districts. So you have to kind of fit in regional representation as part of the board, and they also have individuals that are appointed at the statewide level to represent at large for the system. The next slide. The appointment power is from the governor with the advice and consent of the Senate, and they do have a clause to represent some type of respect to business representation, labor representation, and racial, gender, geographic, and ethnic composition. They do have a prohibition so that any commissioner of a state agency can't serve on a member board. And so this is just a little bit more in terms of what their role and responsibility as for a board. As you can see here, all of this means that they essentially adopt programs. They set fee structures, and then they hire and fire a system chancellor who oversees all of their 26 institutions. Then, as I mentioned, they have no local boards. Next slide. Louisiana, which is a little further south from you, we have the Board of Supervisors there have 17 total members, 15 members. that are represented by two individuals at the congressional level and 3 at large, and then 2 student trustees. And kind of a mix in terms of the student trustee that are part of the Louisiana system. Next slide. The Louisiana Community College Technical System has a system that's is appointed by the governor with the consent of the Senate. This board's role is to have a system president. This system president oversees and evaluates all of the community technical colleges in the states. Those individuals are chancellors. So and those individual colleges are individually accredited through SAC-COC. As you note, bullet number 3 within the organization, we do have some independent advisory boards. Those are not, each institution oversees that process in terms of picking those individuals and also the kind of industries that may be involved in that process. The next slide. Okay, as I mentioned, they hire one individual who oversees the whole process for the institution. Okay, and as I mentioned, they have local advisory boards. They do not have local governing boards, even though they have individual accreditation. Okay. The Alabama system. The Alabama Community College system is candidly really newly formed or reformed. It's about I don't know the exact time period, but I believe it was about 5 years ago. They really did some effort to try to configure their system differently. So what you see here is the ex officio member of that board is the governor. I don't know if they count for quorum, but I would imagine they probably don't show up very often for board meetings. They have 7 members, and each of them are responsible for a single congressional district. So you have regional representation on your local board, on the state board. And then they also have additional ex officio member who serves as a state, who's the head of the State Board of Education, and then 1 at-large member that's appointed by the governor. Next slide. Okay. Our Alabama system represents 24 community and technical colleges, and the 7 members are through the advice and consent of the appointed by the governor and approved by the Senate. And then there's an interesting clause here on the last one. All members appointed shall be free of any contractual employment, personal, or familiar interest in the community college system. So I only bring this up because we did have interestingly, one of our local elected boards in Illinois, they had a faculty member who ran for the board and got elected for her own board. And so that would prove to be an interesting legal case. Next slide. Okay. And you can see here some of the statutory authority for the board. And in addition, the college approves the college president, who then approves the college presidents and also the system chancellor. In terms of local advisory boards, they don't have them. They do have optional advisory boards. So those boards can be anything that the college, quote unquote, thinks it needs in terms of having geographic representation or workforce representation, but they're not a permanent structure of the system in Alabama. Next slide. The North Carolina State Board of Community Colleges is very interesting, and you'll see why. They do have 21 total members, 10 of which are appointed by the governor, 4 by the House, 4 by the Senate. The lieutenant governor is on the board, the state treasurer is on the board, and the most interesting one is the head of the UNC system is on the board. Ironically, the head of the current president of the UNC system is our former chancellor of the community college system in North Carolina, and sets up a kind of an interesting scenario. Next slide. In total, North Carolina is, I believe, our second largest, second largest state in terms of total number of community colleges after California. There's 58, and each of the colleges have a locally appointed board of trustees. Now, the interesting thing about this one is, in terms of the statutory authority for all of these, what I can tell you is the local boards do the hiring and firing process of presidents. But when they go through the search process and they say they nominated Joe Smith to be their president of that institution, that selection process has to then go to the state board for its ultimate ratification. It is typically a rubber stamp, but it is something that is there as a final mechanism for the state board. Okay. And the state board oversees budgets, capital expenses, and as I mentioned, they do ratify the final selection of a college president, but each individual local institution is the one who does the search, goes through the process, and ultimately chooses that individual and pushes that forward. Next slide. In terms of local boards, this is some of the description for all of this. They, for all intents and purposes, they act on behalf of the full authority that's given to them by the state board. So that means everything from leading their institutions, creating new programs, and also they have to have fiscal and programmatic accountability to the state board. Okay. The Ivy Tech system, which is in Indiana, is a 15-member board and 14 must represent in each of the college's legacy regions. Next slide. Okay. Individual campuses of Ivy Tech are considered to be campuses of the Ivy Tech Community College system. And what we also see is that they have some additional members. They have a student representative and a faculty representative as part of the system itself. The Ivy Tech system is appointed by the governor and with support of the Senate. And they do have a caveat here with that second bullet. If you take a look, that you have to have some structural knowledge around some key areas, and that includes manufacturing, commerce, labor, agricultural, state and regional development needs, and or the educational delivery system in the state. So it just can't be your grandmother who, knows nothing about any of these particular areas. Although, with the way that the language is written, I'm sure grandmother probably has some substantive knowledge about some of these areas. Next slide, please. Okay. And so this is some of the delineation of their governance authority. Like I said, they develop. This system functions as the top authority in the state, and so therefore they develop programs, workforce strategies, operate specialty programs. They contract with other educational institutions, and then they have the authority to appoint campus boards or advisory boards. They're not full governing boards in this context, and they set requirements for the institutions. Next slide. And so here's some more. The Ivy Tech Systems Board is solely responsible for hiring and firing their college system president. And then obviously there's some additional items in terms that are represented as part of this list. Okay, next slide. And Hannah will send you these slides, so there's a lot of text in this. So in terms of the local campus boards, each of them can have at least 7 members. And at least 5 of them are representative of the following. And that was referenced in the previous larger state board, and that includes manufacturing, commercial, agricultural, labor, and other educational groups. And they are all appointed by the state board. Okay. And they may include, oh, sorry, go ahead. That's fine. No, go ahead. Go to the next slide. And these are some of the delineations of some of the activities of this local board. So they will develop a budget for campus programs, identify other methods for the facilities and equipment, and essentially are kind of the eyes and ears of the institution and provide feedback to the state board if appropriate. Okay. The Virginia State Board of Community Colleges. This is my home community college system. We have a total of 15 board members, and they are appointed by the governor and approved by the General Assembly. Next slide. In total, there are 23 individual institutions across the state, and they have local advisory boards for each of their colleges. I will say that in context, these are local advisory boards have a little bit more power than what your typical advisory boards are, but we'll get to that in a second. Next slide. And the state board is responsible for its chancellor of its system, who in turn oversees the college presidents within the system. And he is the one, Chancellor Doré right now is the one responsible for doing the reviews of all the college presidents in the system. Okay. Okay. This is just additional information about the advisory board components. These are all locally appointed. When you, for example, I live in Northern Virginia, so the Northern Virginia Community College, they have representatives from a wide variety of counties within our region. So we'll have a representative from Arlington County, Fairfax County, Alexandria County, Loudoun County. Northern Virginia is very broad and expansive, and we have multiple campuses, but those individuals are tasked for these responsibilities. In addition, the local boards do go through the process of interviewing and providing feedback on a presidential candidate, but the system is the one who ultimately coordinates the search, and also the chancellor does the final interview in terms of the selection power. So that's where the kind of the bifurcation of the local board is and the state board. Okay. In addition, there's some other duties as assigned. They do regular board meetings and go through all of the processes, what's transpiring within their state, local boards. Next slide. Okay. The Tennessee Board of Regents, as you recall, one of your neighbors down south, they just went through a system reorg for their institutions. They separated the four-year institutions out of the community college system. So they in total have 19 total members. They have 12 lay citizens that are appointed. They have one voting faculty member. They have one non-voting faculty member. They have one student, and then they have 4 ex officio members of the board: the governor, commissioner of higher education, commissioner of education, commissioner of ag, and or somebody that is from the higher education commission. And those are all and that person's a non-member. Okay. In total, they represent 37 community and technical colleges throughout the system. Now, they do have sub-councils and groups, advisory groups, that help develop policies of the board within institutions. So this is structurally a little bit different. And we can go to the next slide. We can talk through what that structure looks like. Well, this is just additional information about the actual state board and kind of what they're responsible for doing. But these sub-councils are interesting because for me, And these advisory groups aren't necessarily what we would counsel as a local or advisory board. These are more structurally components of the workforce within your system, and then providing feedback around certain areas. So what you see is the academic affairs officers subcouncil, business affairs subcouncil, faculty subcouncil, IT. This is not what we would constitute as a advisory board that's providing you feedback on the changes within the Advanced Manufacturing Center, for example. Okay. So here's some additional areas in terms of some other sub-councils and advisory boards. Okay. And the last slide for this conversation, and there's additional stuff that you can read in your leisure, but I wanted to make sure I covered, is these are the numbers. And now this is not necessarily expansive of all of our state boards, but what I wanted to do was kind of give you a geographic and also kind of talk through about some of the variances within our system. As you can see here, state boards are typically larger than local community college boards. The average size for most of our locally appointed or locally elected boards is around 7. I will not include Mississippi because our Mississippi community colleges are around over 20 board members at the local level. So you have a low mark of Alabama of 10 all the way to North Carolina, which is 21. With it, so that averages out to about 16. I will say, if you embark on this process, we always tell boards, as they think about the total number within a board, we always tell them, do not choose an even number. If you're tempting fate by having a tie vote with an even number, so always have an odd especially if you have everybody there. So I know I went relatively quickly. I apologize, but I wanted to make sure I covered at least the state governance structures, and I'm happy to answer questions from all of you.
Okay, thanks, G. Appreciate it. Any questions? I don't see any hands up.
Chair, if no one has a question, I'm going to ask you the same question I asked you last week.
Okay.
What's, in your opinion, is an ideal size for a board of regents or board of trustees that's functional, but still gets the job done, given your research across the country?
Well, so I think the thing that I mentioned to you last week, and I'll mention to you again this week, especially if you have a state board and you're trying to do the single accreditation model, especially. If you take a look at the states that are represented on this group list, they have regional representation. So you all have, and they've kind of allotted them through the congressional district process. So the question for all of you is, what's that exact number? Is that 1 per congressional district? Is that 2 per congressional district? You all have 6 congressional districts. So, there is a huge jump between 6 to 12. But that's kind of, or you can also fill out with some at-large members that are represented across the state. A couple of the state boards also have student representation on their boards that are segregated just for students. I think the thing I mentioned last week, and I'll mention again, a number of our systems and local boards do not give full voting rights to students. And typically that demarcation point for students resides around specifically the compensation section relative to their college president. So they kind of bifurcate that out. They vote on other things, consent items and program approval, but once you get to certain HR matters within the board, that's where they do sever some of the voting rights.
So they have restrictive voting rights.
Correct.
Good.
But I just want to reiterate, I strongly support giving everybody a vote as opposed to a partial vote. If they vote, then they should have, it seems easier for you to, especially for the board chair, to figure out votes if everybody has the same equal vote power.
We definitely understand that. Thank you, G. We appreciate it.
Yeah.
Okay, Dr. Quarles, if you want to continue.
Yes, sir. Thank you, G. Talk to you soon. Okay, so
Thank you.
Thank you. So very briefly, we're going to get us moving here. Joe May can't join us, but Dr. Newberry and Hannah can just very quickly, maybe about 8 minutes, just talk about the Dallas system and why that has come up so often from other speakers. It's worth an investigation. And then we're going to transition to Dr. Scott Williams to give us an update from the first work group, and then we'll get you on the road. So at this time, let's hear a little bit about Dallas, about 8 minutes or so.
All right, or less, so that's a challenge. We'll do it. So we heard a full hour presentation from Dr. Joe May last week, and what a powerful and compelling presentation it was. So Hannah and I have our hands full trying to capsulize that and give you a sense of some of the main points. And it is important, I think we'd all agree, to take a look at the Dallas example, because as Dr. Meduco pointed out, he was aware, and he was absolutely correct. There is no example in the southern Saxe-OC area of a whole state single accreditation. However, there are a number of good examples of clusters of colleges, particularly in Texas, where 7 or 8 previously independently accredited colleges have been combined into singly accredited units. The most recent example, and one that is particularly important for us because it's potentially can show us the pathway forward with accreditation with Saxe-OC, is the Dallas College example. And so Hannah and I are going to give you some of the highlights. Now, emphasize this is highlights of highlights from Joe May. Tremendous research. I mean, more research we do into that model, the better we will be prepared for continuing on our own journey. So the Dallas district, comprised of 6 individually accredited or locally accredited institutions. It's been in existence since 1965, and over the decades has grown to really what is really the largest community college district in Texas. 118,000 students served per year, 90,000 credit students. And it was originally structured, and if you look at the next slide, it grew organically from the early days, and one college would be formed, and then another, and you can see those institutions listed there: El Centro, Richland, Brookhaven, Eastland and Mountain View, and Cedar Valley and North Lake. And so by the time we arrived in roughly 2019, when Joe May had been chancellor there for several years, there were 7 institutions, very robust district, but in many ways, according to the folks who love that system of colleges, and yet we're evaluating it with the cold eye of what impact is this set of colleges having on the community. There were some serious shortcomings. And so to move to the next slide, a few facts. The community colleges in the Dallas district serve a lot of students from underserved populations. And of course, this is characteristic of community and technical colleges across the country. It's characteristic of our colleges. But in the Dallas area, it was really a critical point of analysis when they realized that of those students who came to one or more of the colleges, less than 10% could be projected to earn a college degree 6 years after graduating. So this was one of many points of clarity and understanding and questioning. Is this the most effective way that we can organize our colleges? And moving on to the next slide, just the highlights here. 70%, 77% of the students were economically disadvantaged. And yet for economically disadvantaged students, the prospects of completing that post-secondary credential were not slim to none, but really a struggle. Very poor yield, if you want to say it in those kinds of terms. What can the college system do to improve its services to all students, but particularly those who are economically disadvantaged? And then when you look at the college's alignment with the economic development needs of business and industry, another stark fact emerged. Joe May spent a good bit of time talking about his in-depth conversations with industry leaders across the whole spectrum of industry sectors. And it was quite clear that even though particular colleges may have programs that met the needs of a particular industry, as a whole, there was just huge gaps in some parts of the county, misalignment. And here's the data that you can see: 65% of the current jobs, 90% of the new jobs require post-secondary credential. Yet, in the case of these colleges in Dallas, the colleges were producing less than 5% of the needed employees. So these were, and other factors, really drove Joe May, the board, the leadership of the college to ask some serious questions. And so they would move, and here we're going to skip down the timeline and get to the point where they are considering what some initially called a dramatic or even a radical reorganization. 7 independently accredited colleges, now they're moving toward bringing them all together under one umbrella, singly accredited. And Joe May helped all the discussion when he was at the PLT meeting by talking about what was the driving factor, what is the why behind the consolidation. And one point that he made early on, if you look at that last bullet, unlike other institutions, our consolidation was not motivated by financial need. He's talked about the fact that there may be some savings here and there. It's hard to analyze, but the bottom line is the reason behind the consolidation was not an effort to save money. It was rather an effort to serve students and serve communities. And he gave a number of examples of why his analysis showed that students were not being served, but it boiled down to the differences between the colleges. Now, unlike the Kentucky system, where there is a lot of coordination and alignment between our colleges over the 25 years of KCTCS, but we would admit still work to be done. In this system, it was like 7 different countries. It was a very balkanized kind of a system, and that became the enemy to providing a good, consistent student experience across. This next slide shows one of Joe May's favorite quotes. Autonomy is the enemy to solving student problems. So Joe May was no fan of independently accredited college in this setting. Now, interestingly, he had been the head of the Colorado system earlier in his career, where there were independently accredited colleges, and again, head of the Louisiana system. But when he gets to Dallas and begins to analyze the problems and the gaps, the enemy was independent accreditation. And so to move to the next slide, this is a case study. They spent a lot of time interviewing students about their experience at the college. Not dozens of students, but hundreds of students. I had a team of interviewers that spread out over the campuses and over a period of a year. And this is just one example of a student experience. Here's a young man, Emmanuel, 66 credit hours, which is enough for an associate's degree. He's in accounting. He has excellent prospects for a good job, $48,000 a year. But here's the rub. Because a number of colleges in the Dallas area he was able to take a few classes here, and then job schedule would change, and he would find it more convenient to take classes at another college. So this gentleman has 66 hours, but they're from different colleges, and as a result, he's unable to get a degree from any one of the colleges because of a particular requirement at SAC-COC, and all the regional accrediting agencies have this. It's a residency requirement where you need to have at least 25% of your total program from that institution. So Emmanuel cannot get a degree. So Joe May uses this as an example, kind of a representative experience that illustrates all the problems with the balkanized system. The last two slides that we'll show you briefly is the timeline. You know, we're lots of questions for him, and he was able to have a layout. We had heard various experiences in the Connecticut experience. Dr. Meduco, I think he said at least 6 years. Some of the single accreditation experiences do appear to have been multi-year. Joe May was able to demonstrate to us, and Dr. Quarles may want to confirm his conversation this morning with the executive director, with Bill Whelan at SACS, that it was indeed possible with proper planning and groundwork and close coordination with the accrediting agency to move through the process really in about 18 months. Now, it takes a lot of work. It's not easy, as Joe May pointed out to us, but it actually was feasible in this particular case. So I'm going to conclude my remarks there, and Hannah, some points that you'd like to reinforce?
Very good, thank
Yeah.
you. Just a few items I remember from Chancellor May's presentation. He emphasized that throughout the process, there were 700 layoffs, but in addition to that, there were actually 300 new career coaches added, and that was part of his vision to really focus on students and student needs here. He saw a huge gap between academic advising and connecting to real jobs, and so that was a key aspect of bringing in career coaches to help students find those jobs out there. He also mentioned that his system set aside $10 million for unspecified cost, most of which went towards severance packages for those layoffs. And then they set aside an additional $8 million for specific costs around infrastructure for class scheduling, an HR portal that everyone could access, which we, I think, already have in place, those kinds of things. But total, he was estimating an $18 million investment. He also, again, emphasized that it is never about the cost. It's always got to be on the student. And I thought what was really interesting is that before he did any of this, he actually went to other industries. He mentioned healthcare, banking, the auto industry, met with CEOs about the process that they went through. And that is where he kind of structured his vision and how to do this so quickly and to have buy-in, have that, everyone have their voice heard, but also act swiftly and quickly so as to minimize disruption. So that was a little bit of a different approach, I think, than what we saw with Connecticut, just for your consideration. He also said that there was a lot of difficulty in directing. For instance, when superintendents would come and say, well, which college should I send a student to, or which college should a company partner with? This made it much easier to say they can partner with just Dallas and not have to distinguish between the different colleges. So those are all the points that I had. But the full presentation is out there for you on your SharePoint if you want to take a look at it.
Thank you both. And if it's okay, any questions about Dallas? Thanks for covering for one of our speakers today. But again, another experience within the SAC-COC accrediting agency of dramatic change. Any questions?
Yeah,
Karen?
Dr. Forrest, I guess I have a comment and a question. My comment is I love the idea of the career coaches being brought in because I do see that as a disconnect in so many areas, 2 years and 4 years. So, that's a key takeaway. Someone may have already said this, and maybe I didn't hear it, but as you look across the country, are we in the minority without being centralized? I mean, how many systems are out there similar to ours now? I think these are great examples that are coming through, but are these singular, or are we seeing more and more of these that are successful?
I'll take a first stab at that. So we are most similar to Virginia and Louisiana. And G covered that in his presentation, but those are the most similar current structures about how we are currently organized. Again, those systems have gone through dramatic change. I think it's going to take a while to figure out what the savings were.
Yeah.
But it's going to take a while to figure out if this was the right decision. And there's a lot of unknowns. We don't know how much it's going to cost. We don't know how long it will take. There's other political uncertainties, but these are things that this work group is starting to address that Dr. Williams is going to mention next. Dr. Newberry, any additional comments about other systems that we may be similar to that have gone through something?
Well, you can count on the fingers of two hands. There have been several systems created, but it is the majority of systems across the country. There's great variety of systems. And the ones that have achieved single accreditation are Ivy Tech College of Indiana. We now know and heard today about the Connecticut state system. There are the Texas model systems that we have talked about. There are a lot of state systems that really have almost no centralization. If you look at the Michigan community colleges, for example, there virtually no central office. And so there's a great variety, but this particular approach of taking a system of colleges and moving to single accreditation, you can argue that it's the best practice, a wave of the future.
Mm-hmm.
And certainly it presents a model at this juncture, we would agree, in the history of KCTCS, where you get in a fresh start framework with 179 of taking a look at all the possibilities. It represents a way to think about transforming for the future. And as Dr. Quarles often says, resetting and realigning the system for its next 25 years.
Yep. Thank you.
Rhea?
Yeah, kind of to piggyback on Karen's question, you were asking for research questions, Dr. Quarles. Can we get a hard count on kind of where community college systems fit across the board?
Yeah.
Just to kind of see where we are, where we fall, and who's where. I mean, I realize the Texas ones are definitely, not state, but they are doing, like you said, I think they're Dallas is 3 Kentucky's. So that would be great. Thank you.
Yeah, and I think too, that's a good point on that. And I think the last speaker spoke about success placing students in the workforce. If we have stats related to that in terms of where our graduates land, who actually land with different businesses, what our success rate is, I think that would be very helpful.
Great. Thank you both.
James Lee / Joe?
Yes, sir. I have a question in listening to the presentations, the pros and cons of why you go to a single accreditation, and they had all of the pitfalls, but a lot of those we already address as far as workforce development. So at community colleges, I know our college, when we hear presentations from our college presidents, they tell us about community people coming and asking for assistance in jobs or so. So, I see a lot of the pitfalls of the others that we do very well at our 16 community colleges. And, I agree that we need to have more data about job performance, workforce placements, this and that. But a lot of those things that I viewed as other people were having difficulty with, I think our 16 colleges do a great job in that. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you. And it is true that the motivations why these other systems made dramatic changes are different wherever you go. In Dallas, it was the student perspective and so many students not graduating because of residency issues. Connecticut, it was politically driven by the governor. And that decision was made and then implemented close to 8 years later. And so that's another thing to consider. But one of the neat things is that our work group, which we'll hear from next, is looking at the Kentucky approach. What's best for Kentucky? And so,
and one of the things about Connecticut is, and I tried to point out at that last comment was, I mean, theirs was financially driven. Did he not say that their budget was like forecasting to be over $100 million deficit?
Yeah.
And I know he's saying some of that was state budgeting, but I mean, it was progressively getting worse. They had to put a stop to something. So I'm not sure exactly if that was totally state driven, reducing financing, but that seemed like they had to do it from that perspective.
There was also a financial necessity for Maine's consolidation as well as Arkansas's consolidation, where it was consolidate or wither on the vine situation.
Yeah, and I really feel like whether we go down the path of central or single accreditation or not, you know, there's things that we have to improve on that, as JR has pointed out, that we've already known that we need to improve on. So I really feel like either way we go, we have to use these committees to flesh these out and start focusing on it, regardless of how we approach it. So let's hear from Dr. Williams.
Yeah, so at this time, I'm gonna hand it over to Dr. Williams, who's heading up the first, again, of 5 work groups. This one's about governance, so you just heard from the same speakers that his group has been working from. So the floor is yours.
Thank you, Chair Martin. Thank you, Dr. Quarles. So good afternoon, and it looks like I'm between you all and the rest of your day. So we'll try to wrap this up. But to do been some excellent questions, and obviously you all have gone through today and seen a big part of why we're going through this process. And so outside of the fact that General Assembly has asked us to look at this, there's some other significant reasons why we're doing this. And this came through very clearly with our governance and organizational structure team. And I'd like to share with you very briefly that the approach they are taking is, this is really about what's the best for our students in the Commonwealth of Kentucky, how we can better deliver our services. That's the approach this work team is taking. I'm proud of the fact that they are committed to that and worrying less about what the individual impact may be. And so that's kind of the headset, if you will, where the team's coming from. So we are the first team that's been put together. We're in our 3rd week of activity. So we've been very busy early on, and really want to share with you today is where we're at preliminarily. So at this point in time, what are the options that we are considering? So the work team put together some pros and cons very early on. We presented those to the PLT, and the PLT, as well as Dr. Quarles' cabinet, with the input from the work team, really centered around, all right, what options should we really be considering? And as a result of that, the one thing that rang true when we looked at the input from the PLT, from the KCTCS cabinet, and from the work team is that remaining under the status quo, how we are currently structured and how we currently operate, was really unsustainable. That something we needed to look at some form of change, structural and governance change. So as a result of that, coming out of that meeting, I think the most successful thing is that there were some areas that the PLT, that Dr. Quarles' cabinet as well as the work team were all open and agreeable to, and that was that we should certainly consider the following potential structural changes. They both were around single accreditation. The one was single accreditation without any consolidations or / mergers. And the other consideration, the other potential structural change we need to consider is single accreditation with some consolidations. We never did define what some consolidations was, but we felt like that was also something that was worthy and needed to be looked at. So from that point, how did we come to those decisions, if you will? And really it's not a decision. How did we come to our focus being we need to look at something beyond the status quo? And that was really based upon the identified advantages and disadvantages. So we spent a lot of time looking at the high level advantages and disadvantages, pros and cons, if you will, of some kind of structural change versus our current structure. And as a result of that, we viewed those through 3 criteria, 3 lenses: a student lens, we viewed those through a community lens, and a financial lens. And so I'm going to share with you really the 4 top advantages we came out from those discussions and the 4 top disadvantages. So what are the top advantages? Many of these you've heard, but really the one was our top advantage was allow us to remove obstacles and barriers for students by streamlining our processes and procedures so that we can increase student success. Specifically, college going rates, completion rates, employability, all across the Commonwealth. And you are all right. We do have a very uniform, consolidated processes, but they are still not all consistent. There's still a lot of college autonomy. For instance, Title IV processes, because we all have different PPAs. So students that go from one college to another have to go through that whole Title IV process again. So there are ways in which we could streamline a lot of things if we looked at a single accredited system. That's just one example. Second one was allow us to build, strengthen, and leverage our legislative and workforce relationships so that we're better positioned to meet the existing emerging needs of the Commonwealth. We heard that. And Regent Feineman, I think you have really kind of spoke to that, in that there are some advantages if we looked at a single accreditation system as a result of that. The third was, the third is that it can allow us to redesign our institutions in a more financially sustainable and viable model to improve our support for students and our communities. So while we clearly understand there's not going to be a financial windfall in this, there could be some financial benefits. And then that led us into the 4th advantage of this, is that it could allow us to redirect some of the potential savings from these resources into shared services so that we could serve our students in the Commonwealth in a much more effective and efficient manner. A lot of our advantages are really focused on how can we be better prepared for the future. You clearly have seen in today's presentation that the demographic in which the community college and technical, the KCTCS system was built upon is not the same demographic we are going to be seeing currently or into the future. So how are we going to remain relevant and be able to serve them? Those advantages, the group felt like, were the top ones to do that. Doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure out the disadvantages. There's been a number of questions related to this from all of y'all. Several things that we just don't know at this point in time, which we categorize as disadvantages, is what's the fiscal impact going to be? We don't know. We don't know what that's going to be. The length of time is unknown. How long will it take us? We've heard anywhere from 5 to 7 years to get singly accredited to a year. So we've got to really study that. And then the level of disruption. We know there will be disruption. There will be disruption internally. There will be disruption in our external communities. And quite frankly, there's going to be early disruption for our students. It will be different than what they're used to. The second level of disadvantages we felt like was this will require complex governance change. The timeline for navigating that change under multiple regulatory systems. We just don't know how long that's going to take. It's not just SAC COC we have to deal with, but we have to deal with CPE, and eventually we're going to have to deal with the Department of Education because we are dependent on Title IV programming. The third disadvantage that was top of mind for this group, and that is the risk of losing college identity and community engagement, especially around our foundations and donor support. Most of our donor support is at a local community level. What's this going to do to that? And quite honestly, this has been mentioned, you're going to lose some local college identity. That's just going to be collateral from this process. And then the fourth and the last one is, you've heard this mentioned before, this is another high priority disadvantage, and that is there is a risk of eliminating personnel and what that will have not only at the college level, but also across the state. So we could see a lot of system-wide wisdom that could be out the door through this process. So, how are we, and when I say we, our governance and organizational work team going about to complete this work? We've still got basically no decisions have been made. We've only got, what I say is, we've kind of narrowed, instead of looking at the full horizon, we've kind of narrowed down to a third of the horizon. So we still got a lot of work to do. But with that being said, the college presidents and the system cabinet have all nominated faculty and staff, and those staff have been assigned by Dr. Quarles to work teams. Ours is one of those. They've been a great work team, and they're working already very diligently. In fact, they met this morning. And so our team in particular has completed a high-level assessment of pros and cons, all right? We provided those to the president's leadership team as well as Dr. Quarles' cabinet through a meeting last week, and then we went through and that group set its own set of pros and cons, which I shared the highest level pros and cons with you just a few minutes ago. So we've been through that process, and that process led us to, hey, maybe we should consider a single accreditation, and we might want to consider some possible consolidations. So that then has directed the work team that I'm overseeing, and now we have to start doing the research to see what is the viability of these potential options. And then from there, once we get to that point, we can then start looking at specific options that we might be able to move forward. So the work team now is, what we've done is we divided into two research teams. Half of our work team is researching and studying accreditation, and the other half is researching and studying consolidations. And so Dr. Newberry's on that team, and I think he's on the accreditation research team, and they had a very robust meeting this morning moving forward for that. Then we'll take those teams' research, and that team's research will help to develop any kind of restructuring or complex institutional changes that we would want to recommend to move forward. It is, our team feels like that they will probably move forward several recommendations to Dr. Quarles, who will then make those recommendations moving forward to the board of directors. So that gives you an idea of where we're at and how we've gotten there. So at this point in time, I'd be happy to entertain any questions that anybody may have.
Questions?
Karen?
You may be on mute, Karen.
Happens to me all the time.
I said all my good stuff. Now I can't remember. But thank you. I think that was very helpful. One of the things that caught my ear from our speaker from Connecticut was underselling the cost savings related to this effort. And I cannot underscore that enough, because we will have to pay the right price for this. And I think being able to, even putting it in an advantage side of the things, I'd be very careful with that, because it's just not education, it's business, it's everywhere. When you start to do this thing, you want a better product. and that's what we're going after. So I just want to throw some caution into that on the advantage side. I like the idea of where the research teams are going. I hope we're not going to underwhelm with our recommendations, because if we do underwhelm, I think legislators and others will certainly be glad to jump in and add on to that. So I really think we need to be aggressive with our recommendations.
You bet.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you for that, Regent Vine. And it's interesting enough that I will just have to say that the generalized support for something that I would consider a radical change came out of our meetings last week and from this work team. Let me just say, far exceeded my expectation. There seems to be a really generalized support to do something transformational, and so I think that hopefully we can meet that goal of yours and do something that is, we're not going to underwhelm on the transformation.
And I think too, the fact that I think it was Connecticut said that there was the layoff of 700 employees, but the addition of 300 coaches.
Yeah,
that's relevant.
It is. Yeah.
Okay, Joe, I think you were next.
Yeah, I'm a little confused. Can you hear me? So the thing that made this work group come together, or what they looked at, was status quo or single accreditation. And there's nothing in between. It sounds like we've already, before we've even done the research, put the cart in front of the horse and saying, we're moving this way because we don't want to be status quo anymore, and this is the only way we can see. So I'm just a little confused about that process. If you can,
Right. Yeah, good question, Joe. And so for brevity, we didn't go through every option, but no, many kind of options were looked at and evaluated. So it wasn't just one or the other. And again, none of those options. So we looked at the option of regional consolidations and each region being independently, accredited. So we looked at almost everything in between. Again, we've not even decided on single accreditation. So there's been no decision made. That was just the areas we were least familiar with and we had the most questions, Joe. So at this point in time, no. To answer your question, others were discussed, talked about. This is where we are focusing our research initially because we have the least amount of understanding on this. So does that make sense?
Yeah, I think it makes sense. I really hope that's the case. Honestly, I hope that the research is done and the real numbers are vetted out. And I hope we haven't decided to do something already and we're just filling in the back data to get there. That's my concern. So thank you, I appreciate it.
This is
just information. I agree with you, and that's accurate. We've not made, the work team itself has not made any decisions, nor is it really going to make decisions. It's just basically we're trying to get the information together that can allow the decision makers to look at what kind of recommendations might come forward. So all options are on the table at this point in time. I would even say that even though everybody thinks there's a tendency for everybody to believe we really would be the benefit of our students in the state if we do some structural changes. Still, there's not, that might be done without any kind of accreditation change. Does that make sense, Joe? So that's being discussed.
That's what I was kind of thinking the process we'll be looking at a lot more, is not skipping straight to single accreditation, but the things that we can do now effectively without having to spend $50 million to get there. But
on the flip side, I think it would be short-sighted of us not to look at all these other options as well. So just because they may be difficult doesn't mean they may not be beneficial. So we need to take a look at them as well, and not just the flip side say, well, let's not change anything. So we're going to have to look at all of it.
Thank you.
Okay, Brianna.
So one question for Dr. Williams, one question for Dr. Quarles. Dr. Quarles, I'll start with you. I've had some emails and some messages from faculty and staff across the system. They're interested to know if all of these work teams will have the transparency that the Huron process had. I think that they really enjoyed that. I don't know that that means that they want research as it comes, but Dr. Williams did mention there was an assessment given. What questions were asked? I mean, I think things like that, but that was for all of the teams. So that's just a question to pose to you.
Yes, so we're committed to transparency. The SharePoint site will be up tomorrow, and the ability of any KCTCS employee to access that material. To me, it doesn't matter if you're a tenured faculty member or a member of the ground maintenance team. If they want to take a look at this and provide feedback, we want that. Secondly, the other 4 work teams will be up and running shortly after the June board meeting. Again, this one's the first one, structural changes. And then also keep in mind that, speaking of Huron, that yes, we have a rapid response team for research questions, but for us, we may be one of the most studied systems in America. We have Huron, Conclusions, Ernst & Young last year, both kind of touched upon some of the stuff. And so we hope to build upon that. And that's actually part of the incorporation language of the joint resolution. But to get back to your question about transparency, we're committed to that. And we want to make sure that if you have a suggestion or others about what other things we can do better, we'll always be open to that.
Wonderful. Thank you. And then Dr. Williams. So one of the, and I apologize, I think everyone's home in my house all of a sudden. I've got a kid back from college. My connection may be a little, my husband works from home, so I may be a little bit garbled. But quick question. You mentioned one of the disadvantages was the loss of identity. And I do recall many months ago, Dr. Chris Williams was talking about, she kind of focused on signage and things like that. Is that where that is coming from? Or are you anticipating even further loss of identity for the campuses? Just a quick question.
Right. So obviously you've heard this from some of the presenters today, Brian, and that is, there is this opportunity to maybe, let's say that you undergo some kind of a single accreditation, which would precipitate a single institution, which would be a single institutional name. And so that in and of itself could be, for instance, some in the community would say, well, I don't want the name of my college changed, or those kinds of things. So the internal community of the college may not want those kinds of things. You lived through this when we did this when KCTCS was created. You know what I'm saying? So that's what we feel like when we say there could be loss of community identity moving forward. And so in each of the groups, the Dallas College and Connecticut, they have said, even students sometimes, got confused through this process. So we feel like that's something that we need to consider. So our foundations in Connecticut's a prime example of this. It got so bad for them with their foundations, they just didn't touch them. They left them as freestanding entities. So I hope that helps answer the question, Brianna. Does that make sense?
It does. And I wonder if perhaps you guys maybe got this from the Connecticut presenter that we didn't hear today. Some of the stuff I had read prior to the meeting talked about the creation of a second system office for Connecticut. Was that true?
Not that I'm aware of.
Okay, just wanted.
But one thing interesting, speaking of college identity, although they're one system in Connecticut, their foundation board stayed intact as legacy foundation boards, because you had donors that say, well, I only want to donate to the former community college that I graduated from, knowing that money's going to stay local. So the identity, preservation of identity and the goodwill associated with 16 unique identities has come up at every single meeting so far.
And I would just like to add, if you don't mind, Dr. Quarles, because I think this is directly related to your question around, and that is, you heard Connecticut say this, and Ivy Tech's done this over the years. At the end of the day, even if you're singly accredited, you still have to have a high degree of autonomy at your campuses. Does that, you're always going to have some degree of autonomy. So Ivy Tech went through this. They tried to get really strongly centralized, and then they kind of reversed that, and Connecticut's done the same thing. So I don't want us as an institution or an organization to be too fearful of single accreditation just because you think it means that colleges won't have any autonomy. They probably will still have a strong degree of autonomy just so that they can serve their local communities better. So, that's just, I think, something we got to keep in mind if that was a route we wanted to go. So I think that's oftentimes the first thing that comes to mind is single accreditation, then you have no input at your own local college or campus, whatever you want to call it. But I don't think we're seeing trends across the nation. That's not the case, right, Tony? Right.
Dr. Williams, thank you. I mean, and I would kind of just go back to the idea of course, the rock seems like forever ago, but a lot of the issues with identity were actually researched way back then. So we already have gleaned quite a bit of information related to that. So I just think it's maybe important to kind of look at the work we've already also done that could potentially help your group, your work team.
And it is. That's really where we're pulling the research from Huron, CPE study, the rock, all that we're just pulling together so that we can address the things we're specifically asked to look at. So Dr. Quarles is right. The good news is we don't have to generate a lot of new information. We just got to pull it together.
Yeah. Thank you both.
Mm-hmm.
Well, it's almost 4 o'clock. Dr. Quarles, do you have any closing statements?
Yes, I know it's been a long afternoon. We threw a lot at you. Wonderful speakers today to just give us some perspective of what the process might look like if we make decisions. So thank you for your time. I also want to say thank you to those who serve on these work groups, put in extra hours for us. I want you to think about 2 things, if you don't mind. Think about the long-term viability of our community college system in Kentucky. And hopefully that's the perspective that we all approach this with, is what's the best decision, knowing sometimes that the best medicine sometimes doesn't taste the best, but it can help us out long-term. Secondly, I need your help because this is going to be your vote. Think about the timeline here. We hope to have a general direction after the June board meeting around July about some of these larger issues for a recommendation to the board. Bill, we hope to have somewhat of a rough draft to you by the September board meeting. That way there's enough time for us to respond to the input from our regents. But we need to report back by December and with your approval. And so be thinking about what factors are you going to make this decision on? Here are 4 factors I've identified, and I'm sure there's going to be more. The cost associated with change, the time it would take to implement change, the level of disruption that may have to occur, and the 4th is the opportunity cost. Meaning if we're going to put all this effort into a large change, what are the things that we're not focusing on that we could have focused on instead? And so just be thinking about that, and please email me, call me about your thoughts about today, additional research questions we can talk about. But we also want to get us into a position where we can build consensus about what's best for KCTCS long term. And also keep in mind that our system is already benefiting from a lot of the things that have been implemented that Connecticut didn't have at a starting point. We're already far ahead of Dallas and far ahead of Connecticut when it comes to what we call shared services or uniformed applications across the system. So keep that in mind as well. What are the benefits we can gain regardless of what decision comes out of this today. So I look forward to seeing you all here in 2 weeks. Welcome aboard, Marty, as our regent. And if you have any questions about our next board meeting at Sky, just ask Shannon and she can answer those questions for you. So thank you all so much.
One
Hey,
second.
Barry, can I ask a quick question?
Karen has a question.
Yeah, just a real quick question. How is this being tested against our key stakeholders like legislators, folks along the way? I think the worst thing we could do is have this all gift wrapped and just have them open it up at December 1st. So, how are we sharing this as we move forward? Legislators, CPE, all those groups that you talked about.
Wonderful question. So Hannah, who serves as our external relations, government relations liaison, is keeping our key legislators informed every 2 weeks. I'm on the legislators as well, because I agree with you. The last thing we need to do is submit something that they consider inadequate, or something that they're not going to consider. So we're keeping those relationships strong. And if you remember, the joint resolution says we will work in collaboration with CPE. So our team actually went to CPE yesterday and met with them. And I've been in contact with Dr. Thompson as well about our progress.
Great.
Great question.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I know for a fact that Dr. Quarles has been in constant contact with the key legislators that's helped mold the SJR. So he is keeping them informed, and also they are giving him positive feedback that we are going in the right direction, that we're not going down a path that we shouldn't be.
Good.
So that's the last thing we want to do is step on a landmine.
Right.
Yep.
So
Good to hear. I
Yeah.
figured as much, but thought I better ask.
yeah, no, that's a fair question. But so I echo Dr. Quarles' comments, and I think we are constantly driving towards those 4 ideas: cost, time, level of disruption, and opportunity cost on everything that we're doing. We're trying to become more efficient and effective in what we're doing, and being more responsive to our community partners, because realistically, the legislators are listening to our community partners. I mean, that's who has their ears that we're doing really good or we're doing really bad in whatever fashion. So I think as long as we keep our community partners and our students at the forefront, we're going to do the right thing.
Yeah.
So thank you all for your time. I know it's 3 hours of everybody's time on a Thursday, but this has been very productive.
Yeah.
We've heard some great information from the various sources, and we see that our PLT team and cabinet are all working on this. Now, we need to put our best foot forward with these teams, with the committees that we've developed, and get some feedback back to the board as well. So, okay.
Thank you.
ABC. That concludes our meeting. With that, I'll ask for a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
Aaron, Joe, second. Parliamentarian Duncan.
By acclamation, if you will all raise your hands if you approve the motion. All right, it appears we are adjourned.
Thank you all.
Thank you all. Have a great day.
Thank you. Have a great day.